Barclay's Bonfire by Ralph Henry Barbour. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports, by Donald Cummings. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Barclay's Bonfire. Cobb, 1901, assistant editor of the Daily Quarmazzi, left the office, crossed the road, and entered the college yard by the simple expedient of placing one hand on the fence and vaulting over upon the forbidden grass. Cobb held a Latin book under one arm, for even if one labors on a college paper to mold undergraduate opinion, he is not exempt from a certain amount of class attendance, and carried an open letter in his hand. His round, good-natured face wore a broad grin, and whenever he looked at the letter, his grin increased. He entered the first entrance to Gray's Hall, bounded up 2 flights of narrow stairway, and pounded at a door. An invitation to enter came faintly through 2 thicknesses of oak, and Cobb confronted the single occupant of the room. "How are you, Barclay? Thanks, no, can't stop. Just dropped round to leave this with you. Got it in this morning's mail at the office. Said to myself, just one man in college who'll take interest in this. That's Barclay. So I brought it to you. Might answer it, eh? Good idea, seems to me. Hope you'll be able to do something about it. Bye." And Cobb, grinning like a jovial satyr, was gone. Barclay, 99, laid his pen aside with slow deliberateness, marked his place in the big Greek lexicon beside him, and took up the letter. It was addressed to the editor of the Quarmazzi, and was signed Hiram G. Larkin, Yale, 99. The writer asked to be put in communication with some student in the rival college who was interested in checkers. He dwelt enthusiastically on the formation of a dual checker league. He pointed out the fact that although chess, whist, and other games of skill and science were recognized and participated in each year by teams representing the 2 universities, the noble game of checkers had been hereto woefully neglected. He suggested that teams be formed at each university, and that a tournament be played to decide the championship. When Barclay laid aside the letter, his long and ascetic face held an expression of enthusiastic delight. The one dissipation and hobby of Barclay's studious existence was checkers. He held a college-wide reputation as a grind of the most prominent type. Barclay did not look down on the usual pleasures and frolics of the undergraduate. They simply had, for him, no appeal. He had nothing against football or baseball or track athletics, but he felt no enthusiasm for any of them. Of course, he was always glad when the college teams won. He was patriotic to a high degree, and sometimes, when the bonfires burned and the students cheered and sang, he acknowledged a wish, lying deep down in his heart, that he, too, might be able to derive pleasurable emotions from such celebrations. Barclay, in short, loved Xenophanes and Xenophon, and next to them, checkers. Before he went to bed that night, he answered the Yale man's letter, endorsed the project voluminously, pledged immediate cooperation, and remained fraternally his, Simonides P. Barclay. I have no intention of specifying in detail the steps which resulted in the formation of the Intercollegiate Checkers Association. Barclay and Larkin wrote to each other at least every other day, and at the end of 3 weeks the matter was settled, not, perhaps, just as they had hoped for. Barclay had labored heroically to find a membership for the Checkers Club, but without avail. None wanted to join. Many scoffed, and instead of enthusiasm, he awakened only ridicule. And the Yale man reported like results. So when the rival teams met in a private room in Young's Hotel one December day, they consisted of just Larkin, Yale 99, and Barclay. The tournament was held behind tightly closed doors. Consequently, I am unable to report the play for the reader's benefit. Enough that deep silence and undoubted skill held sway until dusk, at which time the 2 teams passed into the dining hall and ate a dinner, at which much good feeling was displayed by both. and at which day's play was rehearsed scientifically, from oysters to coffee. The teams then shook hands and parted at the entrance. Barclay boarded a car and returned to college, filled with overwhelming triumph. He won 3 out of the 7 games and drawn 2. The checkers championship rested with Harvard. Such a spirit of jubilation possessed Barclay that when he reached his unadorned room and had changed his gold-rimmed glasses for his reading spectacles, he found that Greek for once did not satisfy. He tried light reading in the form of a monograph on the origin of Greek drama, but even then his attention wandered continually. He laid down the book, wiped his glasses thoughtfully, and frowned at the green lampshade. Plainly something was wrong, but what? He pondered deeply for several minutes. Then his brow cleared, and he settled his specs over his lean nose again. He had found the trouble. "The victory," said Barclay soberly to the lampshade, "demands a celebration." The more he thought of it, the more evident it appeared that the day's triumph over the Yale Checkers Club deserved some sort of a public jubilee. He might, considered Barclay, put his head out of the window and cheer, but he wasn't sure that he knew how. Or he might shoot off a revolver, if he had one. Or he might start a bonfire. Ah, that was it, a bonfire. The idea appealed strongly to him, and he remembered that as a boy on a New Hampshire farm, bonfires had ever moved him strangely. He rose and thrust his feet into a pair of immense overshoes, tied a muffler about his long neck, donned his worn ulster, turned down the lamp, and passed out of the room. Yes, he would celebrate with a bonfire. A victory over Yale at checkers was quite as important, in Barclay's estimation, as a triumph over the blue-stockinged football warriors. 15 minutes later a window at the upper end of the college yard was slammed open, and a voice bawled into the frosty night, "Heads out! All heads out!" Then up and down the quadrangle, casements were raised, and broad beams of light glowed out into the gloom, while dozens of other voices passed on the slogan, "Heads out, fellows! Heads out!" "What's up?" cried a thin voice from an upper window of Thayer. "Bonfire in front of University," was the answer. "Bonfire in the yard! All heads out!" sped the cry. "Everybody get wood!" shouted a voice from Weld. "Everybody get wood!" shouted 100 other voices. Then windows were shut, and eager youths clattered downstairs and into the yard, and suddenly the quiet night had become a pandemonium. In front of University Hall a lone figure fed, with shingles and odd bits of wood, a small bonfire, which cast its wan glow against the white front of the sober pile, as if dismayed at its own temerity. For bonfires in the yard are strictly forbidden, and it was many years before the last one had sent its sparks up in front of University. Barclay knew this, and welcomed the danger of probation or dismissal as adding an appropriate touch of the grand and heroic to his celebration. "Everybody get wood." "What's it for?" "Rah for the bonfire." "Who's doing it?" "Wood, wood, get wood, fellows." One of the first to reach the scene was Cobb, 1901. A dozen others were close behind him. "Hello, what's up? What we celebrating?" he asked breathlessly. Then he caught a glimpse of the thin, bespectacled visage of Barclay, and gasped. Why, it's old Barclay." "Rah for Barclay, old grind!" shouted another. "He's the stuff! Everybody get wood!" At that moment a worn-out hen-coop arrived suddenly on the scene, and a shower of sparks told that the fire was gaining courage. "But say, old man, what's it all about?" asked Cobb. "We're celebrating a victory over Yale," answered Barclay soberly, as he adjusted a plank with his foot. There was no undue excitement exhibited by this tall figure in the long ulster, but underneath his calm the blood raced madly through his veins, and a strange and well-nigh uncontrollable joy possessed him as the flames leaped higher and higher. He stooped and picked a brand from the edge of the fire. He waved it thrice about his head, sending the flaring sparks over the ever-increasing crowd. "Hooray!" he yelled, in queer, uncanny tones. "Rah, rah, rah!" answered the throng. "Everybody get wood!" "But what did we do to 'em?" asked Cobb wonderingly. "What's the victory?" "Won the checker championship," answered Barclay proudly. A roar of laughter went up. Fellows fell on their neighbors' necks and giggled hysterically. A football man sat down in the fire and had to be rescued by his friends. Cobb hugged Barclay and patted him on the back. "Good old Barclay," he gurgled. "Oh, good old Barclay. Won the checkers champ. Oh dear, oh dear. Somebody hit me before I... More wood, bawled someone. "Rah for Barclay, the champion checkerist. Everybody cheer for Barclay." And everybody did, many, many times. More wood leaped from out the darkness and fell upon the flaming heap, which now rose to the fellows' shoulders and crackled right merrily. The vicinity of the bonfire was black with yelling, laughing students, and every moment their number grew, as the light was seen at distant dormitories, or the shouting was heard across the avenue. "Speech!" cried the throng. "Speech! Speech!" And Barclay was quickly elevated to the shoulders of Cobb and another, and from there spoke feelingly of the inception and growth of the Checkers Club, of the tournament and of the victory. Very few heard all that speech, for it was cheered incessantly, and those at the edge of the crowd yelled, "Who's the fellow that's talking?" "What'd he do?" "It's Dewey." "No, it's—" At that moment, someone started a song, and by common impulse the students formed in line and began the circuit of the yard, Barclay, on the shoulders of the two riotous friends, leading the procession. Thrice around they went, singing the college songs, cheering on every provocation, clasping arms and swinging ecstatically from side to side, and raising such an uproar as the old college had not often heard. "The most gorgeous bonfire since we won the boat race," panted a senior at the end of the parade, "and the biggest celebration, but I'd like jolly well to know what it's for." "Join hands!" was the cry, and soon 3 rings of dancing, striding youths were circling the fire, their fantastic shadows leaping grotesquely across the front of the buildings. And just when the frolic was at its height, and the fire was crackling more joyously than ever, just when the quiet winter stars were hearkening for the 50th time to the hoarse cheers in honor of Barclay, the dean and 3 professors walked into the circle of radiance, and the throng melted as if by magic, until Barclay, spectacleless, hatless, but exultant, was left standing alone by his bonfire. "Ah, Mr. Barclay," said the dean pleasantly, "will you kindly call on me tomorrow?" "I think we'll let the matter drop," said the dean next day, hiding a smile under an affected frown. "If you will promise, Mr. Barclay, to indulge yourself in no more, The dean's voice failed him, and he swallowed spasmodically, twice, before he found it again. "No more celebrations of victory." And Barclay, very remorseful and chastened this morning, promised, and hurried off to his beloved Greek. Both Barclay and the Yale Checkers Club graduated from their respective universities the following spring, and consequently the Intercollegiate Checkers Association died. But although gone, it was not forgotten, and Barclay's bonfire is still spoken of as the most gorgeous thing that ever happened. End of Barclay's Bonfire, by Ralph Henry Barbour.
How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit CompleteAudiobooks.com for more quality content.
Blacktails in the Badlands. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27. Sports by Kevin S. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Blacktails in the Badlands. One bright, cold November day, I started from a ranch on the Little Missouri in western Dakota, with the set purpose of getting venison for the ever-hungry cowboys. They depended solely upon me for their supply of fresh meat, and as for some time I had shot nothing, I had been the subject of disparaging comment for several days, and the foreman in particular suggested I should stay at home and kill a steer and not chase all the blacktails into the next county. So I stole off this time with an almost guilty conscience, and plunged at once into the dense brush of the river bottom. In the thicket I startled a Virginia deer, but knew it to be one only by the waving salute of its white flag. I also passed a tree in one of the forks of which I had at another time found an old muzzle-loading rifle, rusted, worn, and decaying, a whole history in itself, and beyond, not 200 yards away, an Indian skull with a neat round hole through the crown. The Key-Off stage road crossed the river nearby, and I found out that the place was the scene of the last Indian deviltry in this section. It was the old story. A man, while looking for the stage horses, was shot. A second, hearing the report, went out to see what it meant, and was in turn killed, while a third, with perhaps a little more experience, jumped on the only horse left at the station and fled for his life, with half a dozen Indians in full cry in pursuit. I walked on along the old trail taken by the lucky fugitive, and up out of the river valley to a level plateau above. From the top could be seen in the distance several big buttes, and a dark pine tree, which was to be my objective point for the day's hunt. To the right, as I stepped briskly forward, was a large washout, cut deep into the clay soil, broken and irregular, with sagebrush scattered here and there along its sides and bottom. At the head of the washout I spied some yellow long-horned Texas cattle, and gave them a wide berth. I had had some pleasing experiences of their habits, and did not care just then to be stamped flat. To the left, a few hundred yards away, was a long valley leading to the river, and far out into the prairie, wooded in patches, with small pockets at intervals along the sides, filled with low brush. Here at other times I had jumped whitetails from their daytime naps, and once had a running shot at a large prairie wolf. Bearing all this in mind, I veered out toward the valley, and had not gone far when I saw in the distance a black-tail buck come skipping out of it, and moving with high, long bounds, as is the way of its kind when frightened or going at speed. These bounds, by the way, are very curious. The animal lands on all 4 feet at once, in such a small area that a sombrero would cover the 4 footprints. On a few occasions, when badly frightened, I've seen them run level like a racehorse, but that gait is so unusual as hardly to be considered characteristic of this deer. The deer in question, after a few long jumps, settled down into a trot, then into a walk, and finally stopped and looked about. He did not see me, however, and when he again moved off there was a man jogging quietly along in his wake. Taking advantage of every little hollow to keep from his sight and make a spurt, I soon reduced the distance between us, and arrived at the further edge of the plateau, just in time to see him disappear in some broken country. Continuing cautiously on to where I had last seen him, it became apparent that he had determined upon some definite course, for his tracks led as straight as the nature of the ground would permit, to what I knew was the head of a large coulee which ran into the valley from which he had come into view. As the soil was very hard and dry, and his tracks difficult to follow, I soon determined to leave them and cut straight for the coulee below the point toward which he had been headed. Thinking it likely that he would continue his course down the coulee, at least for a short distance, I ought to be able to write that events turned out exactly as calculated, but they did not. I ran with a fair burst of speed to the edge of the coulee, and when, after quietly watching for 20 minutes, no deer appeared, my mind went back to the foreman's remark about killing a steer. However, it remained for me to go up to the point where it was probable the buck entered the coulee. I accordingly did so, hunting every inch of the way, and looking for sign and whatever else might turn up. I saw nothing, however, but 2 grouse that startled me, as they always do, but especially when my nerves are strung up as they were just then. What course the buck had taken was now the question. Doubling back to my old conclusion that he had gone straight, I went out of the coulee and followed on the line he had gone. At first it led over another small plateau, then it dipped down again into some more badlands, cut up and broken with picturesque red scoria hills covered with straggling, twisted cedar trees. At this time my ardor for this particular buck had begun to subside, and he was now anybody's game. Being somewhat tired as well, I climbed to the top of a round clay butte, sat down, and lighted a pipe. I had been smoking for about 10 minutes, enjoying the mysterious scenery and thinking what course it would be best to take, when again my buck loomed up for a few seconds in the distance, and once more walked quickly out of sight. This was a great surprise and pleasure, and the pace at which I set out in pursuit would have rejoiced the heart of a messenger boy. I ran as fast as I could, stopping to peer over every rise in the land, and was soon rewarded by a most interesting sight. The buck had come upon another, fully as large if not larger than himself, and they were exchanging greetings across the small washout, each extending his nose and smelling the other. They would sniff a minute, and then turn their heads about, flap their long grey ears, and wiggle their short black tails, acting as if they were old friends. It seems a great pity to shoot such noble creatures, but unfortunately this thought rarely comes at the right time for the deer. Given a man having killed nothing for several days, unmercifully guyed by all the cowboys, and add to that a long and lively chase after constantly vanishing venison, when then the man gets within shooting distance, it is hardly at such a time that his kindly instincts will suggest the propriety of letting the poor beast escape. As for myself, with every muscle and nerve at tension from an exciting chase, and mind fairly satisfied of game well earned, it would have taken more self-denial than I pretend to possess not to shoot, especially since we had been living on pork for some time. When fresh meat is plentiful in camp, it is to a real sportsman no sacrifice to let the does and fawns escape, or to shoot them merely with the deadly kodak. But on this day the shack really had to have meat, those lordly heads too. There is always a strong desire, when one comes upon game, to shoot at once, but it is a good plan, if possible, to rest and get one's breathing apparatus into proper shape. It is most exasperating, not to say cruel, to wound a deer and have him get away, and there is good chance of this happening if, before your hand steadies and your head clears, you begin to open fire. From the direction of the wind it was quite evident that the deer could not scent me, so for some moments I lay watching the animals with lively interest and wondering what they would do next. They were apparently satisfied with an occasional sniff at one another, but seemed at the same time to give their attention to something beyond my view. From my position on top of a small mound or butte, where I had crawled with great caution, nothing could be seen either up or down a large washout that was between me and the deer, and I had poked my gun through a bunch of grass and was quite prepared to shoot, when the ears, then the head and body of a large doe, closely followed by a young buck and a yearling, came into full view. To say that I was surprised but faintly expresses it, and for the time being all idea of shooting left me, as I watched with keenest interest the advent of the newcomers. The old doe, as if aware of her importance as the respected matron of a family, walked sedately past the two bucks without bestowing the least attention upon them, selected a grassy spot in the sun, pivoted around twice to level her bed, and quietly settled to earth, facing me. The young buck and yearling stood as if not quite decided whether to follow her example, but finally began to nibble grass and walk about. Here indeed was a pretty picture, an embarrassment of riches. I thought it quite possible to get one big buck, with a chance of a good running shot at the other, and as there was no hurry, and my gun was at a dead rest for the first shot at least, I decided to shoot at the largest buck behind the ear, and then trust to occasion for whatever should follow. I felt that excitement was again about to get the upper hand, and I aimed carefully several times before pulling trigger. At last, after a sharp report, the smoke blew directly in my face, and for a second I could see nothing distinctly, but when it cleared away, and I, having pumped a cartridge into place, was again prepared to shoot, What was my astonishment to find that the buck fired at had utterly disappeared, and that the second, far from being frightened, was still standing with his nose poked down into the washout that had been between them. Without further speculation, I sighted for the neck of buck number 2, and at the report he also disappeared. But this time I made out that he fell over forward into the washout. Everything was now afoot and moving about, so taking a quick shot at the doe behind the shoulder and 3 more at the remaining 2, the last on the jump, I realized by seeing them fall a big day's work, and for the moment felt very proud. It was not until afterward that the feeling came up that my glory would have been quite enough without killing the last 3. But then it must be remembered that we needed every pound of meat at the shack. The 2 big bucks had fallen into the washout, which was about 6 feet deep, one directly on top of the other, and it was beyond my strength without a horse and rope to pull them out. As it was, I had to clean them in very uncomfortable quarters, and not in the most approved manner. During November in the northern latitudes the sun is early to bed, and it was 4 o'clock and getting gray when the last deer had been cared for. At dark I washed all trace of blood from my hands and arms in the river near the shack, and strolled into the kitchen with as woe-begone a countenance as I could muster. I intended to get even with the foreman. A sardonic smile stole over his face, and a disgusted look over those of the others as they noticed my unstained hands. I remarked to the foreman that I had shot some game. He promptly replied, "You didn't. If you had, you'd have been so proud you would be as red as a scoria butte with deer blood to show off. No such luck, and as long as you and that 38 caliber pop gun go rustling around this country, I reckon we'll eat pork and be glad to get it." To this I answered that if he would promise to pack in what game I had killed and would do it, I would give him the hunting knife that he had been trying to steal for the last week. He instantly called it a bargain, and asked how far it was to the game. I answered that it was about 5 miles, and that I would take him there in the morning. So next morning we started on horseback, and I went far enough with him to point out exactly where the deer were, and leaving him I rode over to call on a friend who had a small horse ranch in the neighborhood. I stayed at this horse ranch overnight, and did not get back to our ranch until the following evening, about supper time. It leaked out that the cowboys had fairly screamed with delight when the truth was known, and would rather have been discharged than help the foreman pack in the 5 deer. He did pack them, however, in good faith, and both he and the cowpunchers, now that they had fresh meat, spared me their jokes, and for several days did not try to lend me their pitching ponies. Thus ended a most eventful hunt, and although it was unquestionably a very exceptional piece of good luck to have killed 5 deer neatly, still it is none the less a fact that with a 38 caliber rifle I've always done the best work. With a 50 caliber I've shot deer in their vital parts and then had them run great distances, whereas with the smaller bullet, when properly hit, they would almost invariably double up on the spot. I can give no explanation that will help to determine why the smaller bored rifle has always, with me, been the most efficient. End of Blacktails in the Badlands by Bronson, Rumsey.
Casey at the Bat, read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports, by William Jones, Bonita Springs, Florida. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Casey at the Bat by Ernest Lawrence Thayer. It looked extremely rocky for the Mudville 9 that day. The score stood 4-6 with just an inning left to play. And so, when Cooney died at first and Burroughs did the same, a pallor wreathed the features of the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to go, leaving there the rest with the hope that springs eternal within the human breast. For they thought if only Casey could get one whack at that, they'd put up even money with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, and so likewise did Blake. but the former was a pudding and the latter was a fake. So on the stricken multitude a death-like silence sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey's getting to the bat. But Flynn let drive a single to the wonderment of all, and the much despised Blakey tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had lifted, and they saw what had occurred, there was Blakey safe on second, and Flynn a-hugging Toyd. Then from the gladdened multitude went up a joyous yell. It bounded from the mountain top and rattled in the dale. It struck upon the hillside and rebounded on the flat, for Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing and a smile on Casey's face. And when, responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his hat, no stranger in the crowd would doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded when he wiped them on his shirt. Then, while the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance glanced in Casey's eye, a sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere came hurtling through the air, and Casey stood a-watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman the ball unheeded sped. "That ain't my style," said Casey. "Strike one," the umpire said. From the benches black with people there went up a muffled roar, like the beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore. "Kill him! Kill the umpire!" shouted someone in the stand, and it's likely they'd have killed him had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult. He bade the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the spheroid flew. But Casey still ignored it. And the umpire said, "Strike two." "Fraud!" cried the maddened thousands. And the echo answered, "Fraud!" But the scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face go stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain. And they knew that Casey wouldn't let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lip. His teeth are clenched with hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go. And now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land, the sun is shining bright. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light. And somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. End of Casey at the Bat by Ernest Lawrence Thayer.
Coursing the Prongbuck by Theodore Roosevelt, first published by Forest and Stream in 1901. Read for Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Coursing the Prongbuck. The prongbuck is the most characteristic and distinctive of American game animals. Zoologically speaking, its position is unique. It is the only hollow-horned ruminant which sheds its horns. We speak of it as an antelope, and it does of course represent on our prairies the antelopes of the Old World, and is a distant relative of theirs. But it stands apart from all other horned animals. Its position in the natural world is almost as lonely as that of the giraffe. The chase of the pronghorn has always been to me very attractive, but especially so when carried on by coursing it with greyhounds. Any man who has lived much in the cow country and has wandered about a good deal over the Great Plains is, of course, familiar with this gallant little beast, and has probably had to rely upon it very frequently for the supply of fresh meat. On my ranch it has always been the animal which yielded us most of the fresh meat we had in spring and summer. Of course, at such times we killed only bucks, and even these only when we positively needed the flesh. In all its ways and habits, the pronghorn differs as much from deer and elk as from goat and sheep. Now that the buffalo has gone, it is the only game really at home on the wide plains. It is a striking-looking little creature, with its big bulging eyes, single-pronged horns, and the sharply contrasted coloration of its coat. This coat, by the way, being composed of curiously coarse and brittle hair. In marked contrast to deer, antelope never seek to elude observation. All they care for is to be able to see themselves. As they have good noses and wonderful eyes, and as they live by preference where there is little or no cover, shots at them are usually obtained only at far longer range than is the case with other game. And yet, as they are easily seen and often stand looking at the hunter just barely within very long rifle range, they are always tempting their pursuer to the expenditure of cartridges. More shots are wasted at antelope than at any other game. They would be ever harder to secure were it not that they are subject to fits of panic, folly, or excessive curiosity, which occasionally put them fairly at the mercy of the rifle-bearing hunter. Prongbucks are very fast runners indeed, even faster than deer. They vary greatly in speed, however, precisely as is the case with deer. In fact, I think that the average hunter makes altogether too little account of this individual variation among different animals of the same kind. Under the same conditions, different deer and antelope vary in speed and wariness, exactly as bears and cougars vary in cunning and ferocity. When in perfect condition, a full-grown buck antelope, from its strength and size, is faster and more enduring than an old doe, but a fat buck, before the rut has begun, will often be pulled down by a couple of good greyhounds much more speedily than a flying yearling or a 2-year-old doe. Under favorable circumstances, when the antelope was jumped nearby, I have seen one overhauled and seized by a single first-class greyhound, and on the other hand, I have more than once seen a pronghorn run away from a whole pack of just as good dogs. With a fair start and on good ground, a thoroughbred horse, even though handicapped by the weight of a rider, will run down an antelope, but this is a feat which should rarely be attempted, because such a race, even when carried to a successful issue, is productive of the utmost distress to the steed. Ordinary horses will sometimes run down an antelope which is slower than the average. I had on my ranch an undersized old Indian pony named White Eye, which, when it was fairly roused, showed a remarkable turn of speed and had great endurance. One morning on the round-up, when for some reason we did not work the cattle, I actually ran down an antelope in fair chase on this old pony. It was a nursing doe, and I came over the crest of a hill between 40 and 50 yards away from it. As I wheeled to start back, the old cayuse pricked up his ears with great interest, and the minute I gave him a sign was after it like a shot. Whether, being a cow pony, he started to run it just as if it were a calf, or a yearling trying to break out of the herd, or whether he was overcome by dim reminiscences of buffalo hunting in his Indian youth, I know not. At any rate, after the doe he went, and in a minute or two I found I was drawing up to it. I had a revolver, but of course I did not wish to kill her, and so got my rope ready to try to take her alive. She ran frantically, but the old pony, bending level to the ground, kept up his racing lope and closed right in behind her. As I came up, she fairly bleated. An expert with a rope would have captured her with the utmost ease, but I missed, sending the coil across her shoulders. She again gave an agonized bleat or bark and wheeled around like a shot. The cow pony stopped almost, but not quite, as fast as she got a slight start, and it was some little time before I overhauled her again. When I did, I repeated the performance, and this time when she wheeled, she succeeded in getting on some ground where I could not follow, and I was thrown out. I have done a good deal of coursing with greyhounds at one time or another, but always with scratch packs. The average frontiersman seems to have an inveterate and rooted objection to a dog with pure blood. If he gets a greyhound, his first thought is to cross it with something else, whether a bull mastiff or a setter or a foxhound. There are a few men who keep leashes of greyhounds of pure blood, bred and trained to antelope coursing, and who do their coursing scientifically, carrying the dogs out to the hunting grounds in wagons and exercising every care in the sport. But these men are rare. The average man who dwells where antelope are sufficiently abundant to make coursing a success simply follows the pursuit at odd moments with whatever long-legged dogs he and his neighbors happen to have. And his methods of coursing are apt to be as rough as his outfit. My own coursing has been precisely of this character. At different times I have had on my ranch 1 or 2 high-class greyhounds and Scotch deerhounds, with which we have coursed deer and antelope, as well as jackrabbits, foxes, and coyotes, and we have usually had with them 1 or 2 ordinary hounds and various half-bred dogs. I must add, however, that some of the latter were very good. I can recall in particular 1 fawn-colored beast, a cross between a greyhound and a foxhound, which ran nearly as fast as the former, though it occasionally yelped in shrill tones. It could also trail well, and was thoroughly game, and on one occasion it ran down and killed a coyote single-handed. On going out with these dogs, I rarely chose a day when I was actually in need of fresh meat. If this was the case, I usually went alone with the rifle, but if 1 or 2 other men were at the ranch and we wanted a morning's fun, we would often summon the dogs, mount our horses, and go trooping out to the antelope ground. As there was a good deer country between the ranch bottom and the plains where we found the Prongbuck, it not infrequently happened that we had a chase after blacktail or whitetail on the way. Moreover, when we got out to the ground, before sighting antelope, it frequently happened that the dogs would jump a jackrabbit or a fox, and away the whole set would go after it, streaking through the short grass, sometimes catching their prey in a few hundred yards, and sometimes having to run a mile or so. In consequence, by the time we reached the regular hunting grounds, the dogs were apt to have lost a good deal of their freshness. We would get them in behind the horses and creep cautiously along, trying to find some solitary prongbuck in a suitable place where we could bring up the dogs from behind a hillock and give them a fair start after it. Usually we failed to get the dogs near enough for a good start, and in most cases their chases after unwounded prongbuck resulted in the quarry running clean away from them. Thus the odds were greatly against them. But on the other hand, we helped them wherever possible with the rifle. We often rode well scattered out, and if one of us put up an antelope or had a chance at one when driven by the dogs, he would always fire, and the pack were saved from the ill effects of total discouragement by so often getting these wounded beasts. It was astonishing to see how fast an antelope with a broken leg can run. If such a beast had a good start, and especially if the dogs were tired, it would often lead them a hard chase, and the dogs would be utterly exhausted after it had been killed, so that we would have to let them lie where they were for a long time before trying to lead them down to some stream bed. If possible, we carried water for them in canteens. There were red-letter days, however, in which our dogs fairly ran down and killed antelope, days when the weather was cool, or when it happened that we got our dogs out to the ground without their being tired by previous runs, and found our quarry soon and in favorable places for slipping the hounds. I remember one such chase in particular. We had at the time a mixed pack in which there was only 1 dog of my own, the others being contributed from various sources. It included 2 greyhounds, a rough-coated deerhound, a foxhound, and the fawn-colored crossbred mentioned above. We rode out in the early morning, the dogs trotting behind us, and coming to a low tract of rolling hills just at the edge of the great prairie, we separated and rode over the crest of the nearest ridge. Just as we topped it, a fine buck leaped up from a hollow 100 yards off and turned to look at us for a moment. All the dogs were instantly spinning towards him down the grassy slope. He apparently saw those at the right and, turning, raced away from us in a diagonal line so that the left-hand greyhound, which ran cunningly and tried to cut him off, was very soon almost alongside. He saw her, however, and she was a very fast bitch, just in time, and wheeling, altered his course to the right. As he reached the edge of the prairie, this alteration nearly brought him in contact with the crossbred, which had obtained a rather poor start on the extreme right of the line. Around went the buck again, evidently panic-struck and puzzled to the last degree, and started straight off across the prairie, the dogs literally at his heels, and we urging our horses with whip and spur but a couple of 100 yards behind. For half a mile the pace was tremendous, when one of the greyhounds made a spring at his ear, but failing to make good his hold, was thrown off. However, it halted the buck for a moment and made him turn quarter round, and in a second the deer-hound had seized him by the flank and thrown him, and all the dogs piled on top, never allowing him to rise. Later in the day we again put up a buck not far off. At first it went slowly, and the dogs hauled up on it, but when they got pretty close, it seemed to see them, and letting itself out, went clean away from them almost without effort. Once or twice we came upon bands of antelope, and the hounds would immediately take after them. I was always rather sorry for this, however, because the frightened animals, as is generally the case when beasts are in a herd, seemed to impede one another, and the chase usually ended by the dogs seizing a doe, for it was of course impossible to direct them at any particular beast. It will be seen that with us, coursing was a homely sport. Nevertheless, we had very good fun, and I shall always have enjoyable memories of the rapid gallops across the prairie on the trail of the flying prongbuck. End of Coursing the Prongbuck by Theodore Roosevelt.
A Cricket Bowler by Edward Cracroft Lefroy. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Cricket Bowler. 2 minutes rest till the next man goes in. The tired arms lie with every sinew slack on the mown grass, unbent the supple back, and elbows apt to make the leather spin, up the slow butt and round the unwary sheen. In knavish hands a most unkindly knack. But no guile shelters under this boy's black crisp hair, frank eyes, and honest English skin. 2 minutes only. Conscious of an aim, the new man plants his weapon with profound, long-practised skill that no mere trick may scare. Not loth, the rested lad resumes the game. The flank ball takes one madding tortuous bound, and the meat stamp 3 somersaults in air. End of A Cricket Bowler by Edward Cracroft Lefroy.
The Day of the Race and the Race, from Rowing by R.C. Lehmann. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports, by Patrick Wallace. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Day of the Race. On this tremendous day, towards which all their efforts for weeks past have been directed, the coach will find that all his crew are suffering from that peculiar nervousness to which rowing men have given the name of the needle. It is a complaint against which no length of experience can harden a man, and the veteran of 100 races will feel it as acutely as the boy who is engaged in his first struggle. A sort of forced cheerfulness pervades the air. Men make irrelevant remarks about their oars, their stretchers, or the notorious incapacity of their rivals, while they are reading the newspapers or discussing the politics of the day. Even a coach is seized with the universal affection, however gallantly he may strive against it, and endeavour to entertain the crew with all his best stories of triumphant victories, of defeats averted by brilliant spurts, or of the last sayings of some well-known aquatic humorist. Old oars drop in, and for a few moments divert the conversation, only to flow back with it into the one absorbing topic that occupies all men's minds. The feeling goes on increasing until at last, oh joy, the time comes for getting into the boat. With his faithful oar in his hand and his feet fixed to the stretcher, a man regains his confidence, and when the word is given, he will find that the only effect that the needle has had upon him has been to brace his energies to their highest pitch. The duty of a coach on such an occasion is clear. He must try to keep his men cheerful and prevent them from brooding over the race that is to come. Visits from old oars should be encouraged, for it is often a relief and an amusement to a youngster to find that some solid oar of the past is even more agitated than he is himself. One thing must not be omitted, and that is the preliminary spin, which should take place about 2 hours before the race, and should consist of 2 sharp starts of 10 strokes each, and 1 hard row of a minute. This has an invaluable effect in clearing the wind. I have always felt, when I have rowed more than 1 race in a day, and I think my experience will be confirmed by most other oarsmen, that I have been able to row better, harder, and with less distress in the second race than in the first. An hour and a half before the race a man will be all the better for a biscuit and a hot cup of strong meat soup, with perhaps a dash of brandy to flavour it. But this must depend upon the hour at which the race is rowed, for if you have lunched at 1 and have to race at 3:30, you will want nothing between times to stay your stomach. The early morning sprint should be taken as usual. The race. I shall say, "Are you ready?" once. If I receive no answer, I shall say, "Go." It is the voice of the umpire addressing us from the steam launch in which he will follow the race. He must be a man dead to all feeling, incapable of sympathy, for he actually turns to one of his fellow passengers and makes a jesting remark, while our hearts are palpitating and our minds are strung up to face the stern actualities of the race. The other crew look very big and strong, and fit and determined. We shall have to row our hardest, and we all know it. "Get the top of your shorts properly tucked in," says our captain, "so as not to catch your thumbs. And mind, all of you, eyes in the boat, and when Cox shouts for 10 strokes, let her have it. Come forward all. Touch her gently, bow." It is the Cox who speaks, and his voice sounds thin and far away and dreamlike. "1 more. That'll do. Easy, bow. Now we're straight." "Are you ready?" from the umpire. Great heaven, will he never say "Go!" he shouts. There is a swish, a leap, a strain, a rattle of oars, a sense of something moving very swiftly alongside, a turmoil of water, a confused roar from the bank. We are off. We started splendidly. For half a minute I am a mere machine. Thoughts, feelings, energies, all are concentrated into one desire to work my hardest and to keep in time. Then my mind clears, and I become conscious once more of myself and my surroundings. Have we gained? I must steal a look. By Jupiter, they're leaving us. "Eyes in the boat, 4, screams the Cox. "You're late." Be hanged to Cox, he's got eyes like a lynx. Yes, there's no doubt of it. I can see without looking out of the boat, out of the corner of my eye. They're gaining still. Now their stroke is level with me. Now he has disappeared, and for a few strokes I am conscious of a little demon Cox bobbing and screeching alongside of me. Then he too draws away, and their rudder is all I can see. At last that also vanishes, and a sense of desolation descends on us. Nearly 2 minutes must have gone. I know that by the landmarks we have passed. Surely we ought to spurt. What can Stroke be up to? Is he going to let us be beaten without an effort? Ugh, what a shower bath that was. It's sick splashing as usual. Well, if we're beaten, we must just grin and bear it. We shall have to congratulate the other ruffians. Hateful. Somebody must get beaten, but we're not beaten yet, hang it all. 3 minutes. What's this? Cox is shouting, "Now, 10 hard strokes together, swing out and use your legs." He counts them out for us at the top of his voice. Grand! We're simply flying. That's something like it. And I'm not a bit done yet. We're none of us done. The boat's going like smoke. 9, yells the Cox. 10. Now don't slack off, but keep her going. You're gaining, you're gaying. On to it, all of you. He is purple in the face and foaming at the mouth. Glorious! Their rudder comes back to me. I see their cocks. We are catching them. Now for it. A few strokes more, and the boats are running dead level, and so they continue for half a minute. Stroke has now, however, taken the measure of his foes. We are steadying down and swinging longer, and I am conscious that the other crew are rowing a faster stroke. It is now our turn to leave them. Foot by foot we creep past them. Their bows come level with me, and then slowly recede. I can see the back of their bowman. His zephyr has come out from his shorts. The back of his neck is very pale. There can't be more than 2 minutes left now, and I'm still fit, and my wind is all right. We're winning, I'm sure of it. Oh, they're spurting again, and by Jove, they're gaining. Spurt, Stroke, spurt, we mustn't get beaten on the post. But Stroke, that wary old warrior, knows what he's about. Unmistakable signs prove to him that this effort is the last desperate rally of his enemies. He sees their boat lurch. Their time is becoming erratic. 2 of them are rolling about, in evident distress. His own crew he has well in hand. We are rowing as one man, and he feels that he has only to give a sign, and our restrained eagerness will blaze forth and carry us gloriously past the post. Let us wait, he seems to say, a very few seconds more, until the opposing spurt fades out to its inevitable end. So he rows on imperturbably. But isn't he running it too fine? Not he. He gives a quick word to Cox, rattles his hands away, and swings as if he meant to strike his face against the kelson of the boat. "Pick her up all!" screams the Cox. "Now then," comes in a muffled gasp from the captain. We feel that our moment has come, and with a unanimous impulse we take up the spurt and spin the ship along. In a flash we leap ahead. We leave the other crew as if it was standing still. We're a length ahead. Now we are clear. Half a length of open water divides us from them. To all intents and purposes the race is over. The crowd grows thicker. The shouts from the bank become a deafening din. Enthusiasts scream futile encouragements to pursuer and pursued. And in another moment the flag is down, the Cox cries, "Easy!" And with triumph in our hearts we realize that we have won. The captain turns round to us. He is rowing number 7, his face glowing with pleasure. "Well rowed indeed, you men," he pants. "You all did thundering well. And as for you, Stroke—" But words fail him, and all he can do is to clap his delighted Stroke on the back. Then, having duly exchanged the customary "well rowed" and its accompanying rattle of oars in rollicks with our gallant enemy, we paddle home to the raft, where our exultant coach and our perspiring partisans receive us with handshakings and embraces and fervently epitomized stories of the struggle. "I knew you had got 'em all the way," says the coach. "Did you hear me shout when you got to the halfway point?" "Hear you shout?" we reply in a chorus of joyful assent. "Of course we did. That's why we spurted." Of course we'd heard nothing, but at this moment we almost think we did hear him plainly, and in any case we are not going to be so churlish as to detract from anybody's joy over our victory. And so the struggle is ended, and we have won. Pleasant though it is to know that training is over, there is not one of us who does not feel a sense of sorrow as he realizes that these days of toil and hardship and self-restraint, of glorious health and vigorous effort, are past. All the little worries under which we chafed, the discipline that at times was irksome, the thirst, the fatigue, the exhaustion, the recurrent disappointments, all these become part of a delightful memory. Never again, it may be, shall these 8 men strike the sounding furrows together. The victory that has crowned us with honour has at the same time broken up our companionship of labour and endurance. But its splendid memory and the friendships it knit together, these remain with us and are a part of our lives henceforth wherever we may be. End of The Day of the Race and the Race, from Rowing by R.C. Lehmann.
On Dry Cow Fishing as a Fine Art by Rudyard Kipling, published December 1890. Read by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. On Dry Cow Fishing as a Fine Art. It must be clearly understood that I am not at all proud of this performance. In Florida, men sometimes hook and land on rod and tackle a little finer than a steam crane and chain, a mackerel-like fish called tarpon, which sometimes run up to 120 pounds. Those men stuff their captures and exhibit them in glass cases and become puffed up. On the Columbia River, sturgeon of 150-pound weight are taken with the line. When the sturgeon is hooked, the line is fixed to the nearest pine tree or steamboat wharf, and after some hours or days the sturgeon surrenders himself, if the pine or the line do not give way. The owner of the line then states an oath that he has caught a sturgeon, and he too becomes proud. These things are mentioned to show how light a creel will fill the soul of a man with vanity. I am not proud. It is nothing to me that I have hooked and played 700 pounds weight of quarry. All my desire is to place the little affair on record before the mists of memory breathe the miasma of exaggeration. The minnow cost 18 pence. It was a beautiful quill minnow, and the tackle manner said that it could be thrown as a fly. He guaranteed further in respect to the triangles, it glittered with triangles, that if necessary the minnow would hold a horse. A man who speaks too much truth is just as offensive as a man who speaks too little. None the less, owing to the defective condition of the present law of libel, the tackle-maker's name must be withheld. The minnow and I and the rod went down to a brook to attend to a small jack who lived between 2 clumps of flags in the most cramped swim that he could select. As a proof that my intentions were strictly honorable, I may mention that I was using a light split-cane rod, very dangerous if the line runs through weeds, but very satisfactory in clean water, inasmuch as it keeps a steady strain on the fish and prevents him from taking liberties. I had an old score against that jack. He owed me 2 live bait already, and I had reason to suspect him of coming upstream and interfering with a little bleak pool under a horse bridge, which lay entirely beyond his sphere of legitimate influence. Observe, therefore, that my tackle and my motives pointed clearly to Jack and Jack alone, though I knew that there were a monstrous big perch in the brook. The minnow was thrown as a fly several times, and owing to my peculiar and hitherto unpublished methods of fly throwing, nearly 6 pennyworth of the triangles came off, either in my coat collar or my thumb or the back of my hand. Fly fishing is a very gory amusement. The jack was not interested in the minnow, but towards twilight a boy opened a gate of the field and let in some 20 or 30 cows and half a dozen cart horses, and they were all very much interested. The horses galloped up and down the field and shook the banks, but the cows walked solidly and breathed heavily, as people breathe who appreciate the fine arts. By this time I had given up all hope of catching my jack fairly, but I wanted the live bait and bleak account settled before I went away, even if I tore up the bottom of the brook. Just before I had quite made up my mind to borrow a tin of chloride of lime from the farmhouse, another triangle had fixed itself in my fingers. I made a cast which, for pure skill, exact judgment of distance, and perfect coincidence of hand and eye and brain, would have taken every prize at a bait-casting tournament. That was the first half of the cast. The second was postponed because the quill minnow would not return to its proper place, which was under the lobe of my left ear. It had done thus before, and I supposed it was in collision with a grass tuft, till I turned around and saw a large red and white bald-faced cow trying to rub what would be withers in a horse with her nose. She looked at me reproachfully, and her look said as plainly as words, "The season is too far advanced for gadflies. What is this strange disease?" I replied, "Madam, I must apologize for the unwarrantable liberty on the part of my minnow, but if you will have the goodness to keep still until I can reel in, we will adjust this little difficulty." I reeled in very swiftly and cautiously, but she would not wait. She put her tail in the air and ran away. It was a purely involuntary motion on my part. I struck. Other anglers may contradict me, but I firmly believe that if a man had foul-hooked his best friend through the nose, and that friend ran, the man would strike by instinct. I struck, therefore, and the reel began to sing just as merrily as though I had caught my jack. But had it been a jack, the minnow would have come away. I told the tackle-maker this much afterwards, and he laughed and made allusions to the guarantee about holding a horse. Because it was a fat, innocent she-cow that had done me no harm, the minnow held like an anchor fluke in coral moorings, and I was forced to dance up and down an interminable field very largely used by cattle. It was like salmon fishing in a nightmare. I took gigantic strides, and every stride found me up to my knees in marsh. But the cow seemed to skate along the squashy green by the brook, to skim over the miry backwaters, and to float like a mist through the patches of rush that squirted black filth over my face. Sometimes we whirled through a mob of her friends. There were no friends to help me, and they looked scandalized, and sometimes a young and frivolous cart-horse would join in the chase for a few miles, and kick solid pieces of mud into my eyes, and through all the mud, the milky smell of kine, the rush and the smother, I was aware of my own voice crying, "Pussy, pussy, pussy, pretty pussy, come along then, pussy-cat." You see, it is so hard to speak to a cow properly, and she would not listen. No, she would not listen. Then she stopped, and the moon got up behind the pollards to tell the cows to lie down, but they were all on their feet, and they came trooping to see. And she said, "I haven't had my supper, and I want to go to bed, and please don't worry me." And I said, "The matter has passed beyond any apology. There are 3 courses open to you, my dear lady. If you'll have the common sense to walk up to my creel, I'll get my knife, and you shall have all the minnow. Or again, if you'll let me move across to your near side instead of keeping me so coldly on your off side, the thing will come away in one tweak. I can't pull it out over your withers. Better still, go to a post and rub it out, dear. It won't hurt much, but if you think I'm going to lose my rod to please you, you are mistaken." And she said, "I don't understand what you're saying. I'm very, very unhappy." And I said, "It's all your fault for trying to fish. Do go to the nearest gate post, you nice fat thing, and rub it out." For a moment I fancied she was taking my advice. She ran away, and I followed. But all the other cows came with us in a bunch, and I thought of Phaeton trying to drive the chariot of the sun, and Texas cowboys killed by stampeding cattle, and green grow the rushes, oh, and Solomon and Job, and loosing the hounds of Orion, and hooking Behemoth, and Wordsworth, who talks about whirling round with stones and rocks and trees, and Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush, and Pippin Hill, and Hey Diddle Diddle, and most especially the top joint of my rod. Again she stopped, but nowhere in the neighborhood of my knife, and her sisters stood moon-faced round her. It seemed that she might now run towards me, and I looked for a tree, because cows are very different from salmon, who only jump against the line and never molest the fishermen. What followed was worse than any direct attack. She began to buck-jump, to stand on her head and her tail alternately, to leap into the sky, all 4 feet together, and to dance on her hind legs. It was so violent and improper, so desperately unladylike, that I was inclined to blush, as one would blush at the sight of a prominent statesman sliding down a fire escape, or a duchess chasing her cook with a skillet. That flopsome abandon might go on all night in the lonely meadow among the mists, and if it went on all night, this was pure inspiration, I might be able to worry through the fishing line with my teeth. Those who desire an entirely new sensation should chew with all their teeth and against time through the best waterproofed silk line, one end of which belongs to a mad cow dancing fairy rings in the moonlight, at the same time keeping one end on the cow and the other on the top joint of a split cane rod. She buck-jumped and I bit on the slat just in front of the reel, and I am in a position to state that that line was cord with steel wire throughout the particular section which I attacked. This has been formally denied by the tackle maker, which is not to be believed. The wheep of the broken line running through the rings told me that henceforth the cow and I might be strangers. I had already bidden goodbye to some tooth or teeth, but no price is too great for freedom of the soul. "Madam," I said, "the minnow and 20 feet of very superior line are your alimony without reservation. For the wrong I have unwittingly done to you, I express my sincere regret. At the same time, may I hope that nature, the kindest of nurses, will in due season—" She or one of her companions must have stepped on her spare end of the line in the dark, for she bellowed wildly and ran away, followed by all the cows. I hoped the minnow was disengaged at last, and before I went away looked at my watch, fearing to find it nearly midnight. My last cast for the jack was made at 6:23 p.m. There lacked still 3.5 minutes of the half hour, and I would have sworn that the moon was paling before the dawn. "Seemingly someone were chasing dey cows down to bottom of 10 acre, said the farmer that evening. "'Twasn't you, sir?" "Now, under what earthly circumstances do you suppose I should chase your cows? I wasn't fishing for them, was I?" Then all the farmer's family gave themselves up to jam-smeared laughter for the rest of the evening, because that was a rare and precious jest, and it was repeated for months, and the fame of it spread from that farm to another, and yet another, at least 3 miles away, and it will be used again for the benefit of visitors when the freshets come down in spring. But to the greater establishment of my honor and glory, I submit in print this bald statement of fact, that I may not, through forgetfulness, be tempted later to tell how I hooked a bull on a Marlow buzz, how he ran up a tree and took to water, and how I played him along the London road for 30 miles and gaffed him at Smithfield. Errors of this kind may creep in with the lapse of years, and it is my ambition ever to be a worthy member of that fraternity who pride themselves on never deviating by 1 hair's breadth from the absolute and literal truth. End of On Dry Cow Fishing as a Fine Art by Rudyard Kipling.
A Football Song by Anonymous, from the Sphinx, University of Wisconsin. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Football Song. They talk of joy in fighting, mid whistling shot and shell. They rhyme of bliss in love's sweet kiss, a bliss that none can tell. For ages they've been lilting the praise of ruby wine. All joys most rare, but none compare with tackling hind the line. Give me the football battle, the captain's signal call, the rush that fills the heart with thrills, the line that's like a wall. Give me the hard-fought scrimmage, the joy almost divine, when like a rock we stand the shock and tackle hind the line. The muse has long been singing, the joy the half-back feels, when like a flash he makes a dash and shows the bench his heels. His joy may be ecstatic, it can't be more than mine, when with a smile amid the pile I tackle hind the line. To smash the interference fills me with heartfelt glee, to make a lunge and stop a plunge is more than gold to me. In running with a pigskin I ne'er was known to shine, but I can hew my way clear through and tackle hind the line. There may be joys in heaven, more tender and more tame, but I don't care to go up there unless they play the game. There's gridirons down in Hades, but even there I'd pine to be once more on this fair shore to tackle hind the line. End of a Football Song by Anonymous.
Excerpt from The Girls of Central High at Basketball by Gertrude W. Morrison, published in 1914. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Girls of Central High at Basketball. Basketball is perhaps the most transparent medium for revealing certain angles of character in young girls. At first, the players seldom have anything more than a vague idea of the proper manner of throwing a ball, or the direction in which it is to be thrown. The old joke about a woman throwing a stone at a hen and breaking the pane of glass behind her will soon become a tasteless morsel under the tongue of the humorist. Girls in our great public schools are learning how to throw, and basketball is one of the great helps to this end. The woman of the coming generation is going to have to develop the same arm and shoulder muscles that man displays, and will be able to throw a stone and hit the hen if necessary. The girl beginner at basketball usually has little idea of direction in throwing the ball, nor indeed does she seem to distinguish fairly at first between her opponents and her teammates. Her only idea is to try to propel the ball in the direction of the goal. The thought that by passing it from one to another of her teammates, she will much more likely see it land safely in the basket never seemingly enters her mind. But once a girl has learned to observe and understand the position and function of teammates and opponents, to consider the chances of the game in relation to the score, and bearing these in mind, can form a judgment as to where most advantageous play, and act quickly on it. When she has learned to repress her hysterical excitement and play quietly instead of boisterously, what is it she has gained? It is self-evident that she has won something beside the mere ability to play basketball. She has learned to control her emotions, to a degree at least, through the dictates of her mind. Blind impulse has been supplanted by intelligence. Indeed, she has gained without doubt a balance of mind and character that will work for good, not only to herself but to others. Indeed, it is the following out of the old fact, the uncontrovertible fact of education, that what one learns at school is not so valuable as is the fact that he learns how to learn. Playing basketball seriously will help the girl player to control her emotions and her mind in far higher and more important matters than athletics. To see these 18 girls in their places, alert, unhurried, watchful, and silent, was not alone a pleasing but an inspiring sight. Laura and her teammates, even Roberta, waited like veterans for the referee to throw the ball. Laura and her opposing jumping center were on the qui-vive, muscles taut, and scarcely breathing. Suddenly the ball went up. Laura sprang for it and felt her palms against the big ball. Instantly she passed it to Jess Morse, and within the next few seconds the ball was in play all over the backfield, mostly in the hands of Central High girls. They played hard, but nobody, not even Roberta, played badly. The East High girls were strong opponents, and more than once it looked as though the ball would be carried by them into a goal. However, on each occasion, some brilliant play by a Central High girl brought it back toward the basket, and finally, after 6½ minutes, the visiting team made a goal. The Central High girls were 1 point ahead. The ball went in at center again, and there was a quick interchange of plays between the teams. Suddenly, while the ball was flying through the air toward East High's basket, the referee's whistle sounded. "Foul," she declared, just as the ball popped into the basket. A murmur arose from the East High team. Madeline Spink, the captain, said quietly, "But the goal counts for us, does it not, Miss Lawrence?" "It counts as a goal from a foul," replied the referee, "which means that it is no goal at all, and the ball is in play." The East High girls were more than a little disturbed by the decision. It was a nice point, for on occasion a goal thrown from the foul line counts 1. It broke up, for the minute, the better play of the East High team, and the instant the Central High girls got the ball, they rushed it for a goal. There was great excitement at this point in the game. If Central High won 2 clean points, it would hardly be possible for East High to recover and gain the lead once more. Laura signaled her players from time to time, but she was hampered whenever the ball came near Roberta, or the time was ripe for a massed play. The substitute did not know all the secret signals. Had Hester Grimes only been in her place, her absence crowded the Central High team slowly to the wall. In the very moment of success, when a clean goal was about to be made, they failed, and their opponents got the ball. Again it was passed from hand to hand. One girl bounced the ball, and a foul was called. Again the Central Highs rushed it, and from the foul line made another goal. 2 points ahead, and the boys in the audience cheered madly. No harder fought battle had ever been played upon that court. "Shoot it over, Jess," cried Chet at one point, rising and waving to his particular girl-friend madly. "Look out, they'll get you." "Look out, Laura, don't let them get you." "Ah, that's too bad," grumbled Lance Darby, quite as interested in the work of Chet's sister on the court. "Hi, no fair pulling. Say, where's the referee's eyes?" demanded Chet, the next moment in disgust. "Behind her glasses," said his chum. "I never did believe 4 eyes were as good as 2. The ball came back to center again, and there was little delay before it was put in play. Only 3 minutes remained. The 18 girls were as eager as they could be. Madeline Spink and her teammates were determined to tie the score at least. A clean goal would do it. They rushed the play and carried the ball into Roberta's country. Roberta never had a chance. In a moment the ball was hurtling toward the proper East High girl, and no guarding could save it. A cheer from the audience. Those interested in the East High girls announced another clean goal. The score was tied, and 2 minutes to play. "Do not delay the game, young ladies," warned the referee. They were in position again, and the ball was thrown up. No fumbles now. Every girl was playing for all that there was in her. A single point would decide the rivalry of the 2 schools at the beginning of the playing season. To lead off with this first game would encourage either team immeasurably. East High led off first, but quickly Laura and her teammates got the ball again and pushed it toward the basket. There was no rough play. The umpires as well as the referee watched sharply. It was a sturdy, vigorous, but fair game. This was a time when Hester's hot temper might have brought the team disgrace, and for a moment Laura was, after all, glad that the delinquent had gone home. Then suddenly, from full field and a fair position, the ball rose and flew directly for the basket. While in mid-air the whistle was blown. Time was called, and the game was ended. The spectators as well as the players held their breath, and watched the flying ball. Although the whistle had blown, the goal, if the ball settled into the basket, would count for the visiting team. This one unfinished play would give the girls of Central High 2 clear points in the lead, if all went well. The course of the flying ball was watched by all eyes, therefore. Chet Belding and his mates began their chant, believing that the ball was sure to go true to the basket. But they began too soon. The ball hit the ring of the basket, hovered a moment over it, and then fell back and rolled into the court. Chet's chant of praise changed to a groan. The game was over, and it was a tie. Disappointed as the girls of Central High were, they cheered their opponents nobly, and the East High girls cheered them. The audience had to admit that the game had been keenly fought and, after Hester was put out of it, as cleanly as a basketball game had ever been played on those grounds. End of an excerpt from The Girls of Central High at Basketball by Gertrude W. Morrison, published in 1914.
Observations on Fencing by Thomas Griffiths. Recorded for The Coffee Break Collection 27. Sports by Newgate Novelist. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Observations on Fencing by Thomas Griffiths. 1. Never put yourself on guard within reach of your adversary's thrust, more especially at the time of drawing your sword. 2. Be not affected, negligent, nor stiff. 3. Be not angry at receiving a touch, but take care to avoid it. 4. Do not think yourself expert, but hope you may become so. 5. Be not vain of the hits you give, nor show contempt to those you receive. 6. Do not endeavour to give many thrusts on the lunge, running the risk of receiving one in the interim, and it is wrong to deliver a second hit on the lunge, if you are certain you made a hit the first time. 7. When you present the foils to a stranger, give the choice without pressing. 8. If you are much inferior, make no long assaults. 9. Do nothing that is useless, every movement should tend to your advantage. 10. Judge of a thrust rather by reason than by its success. 11. Let your play be made as much as possible within the line of your adversary's body. 12. It is not enough that the parts of your body agree, that is, that you are supple, firm, and vigorous. They must also answer to your adversary's movements. 13. Endeavour to discover your adversary's designs and conceal your own. 14. Two skilful men fencing together act more with their heads than their hands. 15. The smaller you make your feints, the quicker will your point arrive at your adversary's body. 16. Do not take the time thrust too frequently, unless your adversary is much your inferior, and that you are not likely to be hit at the same time. 17. If one hit the body, and the other the face or elsewhere, at the same time, the hit on the body only is counted. 18. If in binding, parrying, or by any means your adversary's foil falls, the hit that is made in the interval is good, because you are not obliged to know that he will lose the grasp of it. But if the hit is made after you see the foil is out of his hand, you cannot reckon it, but in politeness you should pick up his foil and present it to him. 19. Never attempt to hit your adversary while thrusting carte and tierce in the salute, unless by mutual agreement, and it is a proper civility in saluting to ask the adversary to thrust first. 20. Be sure at no time while fencing with a skilful man to attempt to vault, disarm, etc. These are ridiculous things, only taught by the ignorant, and often attended with danger. 21. Never deny a hit. 22. Do not laugh nor ridicule another's manner of taking his lessons. 23. Never make use of the left arm, nor turn your back to avoid being hit on the chest. 24. Always join foils, if possible, after a hit is made, previous to another attack. Nota bene. Never use the foils without having the mask on. End of Observations on Fencing by Thomas Griffiths.
Robinson's Offbreak by E.B.V. Christian. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27. Sports by Kevin S. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robinson's Offbreak. I suppose there was no more popular cricketer in all Surrey than Jack Robinson. From Halsmere to Croydon, from Redhill to Virginia Water, everyone knew him, and he had played on every green and heath in the county. He seemed to have nothing to do but play cricket, and though he never appeared at the Oval, he had dealt out destruction to the batsmen everywhere else. He was a plucky, hard-hitting batsman, and a good field anywhere, but his most notable quality was his off-break. His balls would whip back a yard at top pace, and on his day no one could stand against him. He had brought victory to the Farley Green Club more times than we, as old rivals of the Farley Green men, cared to remember. Yet he was so good a fellow that a batsman after his third duck's egg bore no malice. You can imagine the dismay at Farley Green and the mixture of congratulations and regret in our village when we heard that Robinson had accepted some business appointment in a cricketless settlement in the South Seas. I said good-bye to him one January day. It was less than 2 months afterward that we heard that his ship had gone down with all hands. That, everyone said, was a wretched end for so good a cricketer. It was a miserable business. But we little thought how far off the end really was, or how much trouble that off-break was yet to cause us. It was when Robinson's will became known that the excitement began. The news of his death was so well authenticated that the court at once presumed his death, and his relatives were about to obtain probate. His bats and bags and other cricket materials he had left amongst those of us who had known him best. His belongings of greater pecuniary value were given to various relatives. But the clause in the will which concerned us most was this: "And I give and bequeath my off-break, together with my pace, pitch, and all other things necessary to the full use and enjoyment of the said off-break, to my friend John Robinson Brown of Wonersh, in the county of Surrey, free of duty." And I express the wish, but so that no precatory or other trust is to be implied in respect of the bequest hereby made, that he will make use of the said off-break for the benefit of the Farley Green Cricket Club, of which we are both members. Now this we strongly objected to. We were deeply sorry Robinson was gone, but we didn't see why, as he was gone, his off-break should remain to injure us. Still, we felt it would be ungracious to dispute the will, and so far as we were concerned, Brown might have enjoyed his legacy unquestioned. But the Godalming men thought otherwise. They entered a caveat, and a suit was commenced in the probate court to establish the will. The first difficulty was to determine what was to be done with the off-break and the rest of the estate while the suit was pending. The writ was issued in March, and clearly the case could not come on for trial till after the long vacation. The whole cricket season would be gone before a decision could be obtained, for these legal umpires in black gowns take longer to make up their minds than our umpires in white coats do. Clearly, poor Robinson's estate must be managed by someone meanwhile, so the plaintiff appealed to the court to appoint a receiver. At first the Godalming men meant to oppose the application, but in the court I went down out of curiosity to hear the application made. I happened to meet Harvey, the Godalming captain, and a few minutes' conversation quite altered the defendant's tactics. When the motion was reached, the counsel for the Godalming men said he was quite agreed that an administrator, pendente lite, must be appointed. The only question was, who was the most proper person for the post? He suggested Mr. Wilson, of Farley Green, one of the plaintiffs, to whom the defendants felt there could be no objection. The plaintiff's counsel, not seeing through this sudden change of front, accepted the suggestion. I don't think Wilson, who was the crack batsman of Farley Green, realized the awful consequences of that appointment. He was a really good batsman, as all our bowlers knew from sad experience, until he was appointed by the court. This order was made in May, and Wilson had just started the season with a not-out innings of 60 when he was thus appointed administrator pendente lite and receiver of the off-break. After that, for 2 months, in 14 matches and 17 innings, Wilson did not make 10 runs. His luck was lamentable. The most ordinary bowler could get him out. Plain-looking balls whipped back from the off and beat him. A man who had never been known to break a ball an inch could, when bowling to Wilson, make the ball come back a yard. Farley Green did not win a match, for Wilson's failure and the loss of Robinson demoralized the rest. Wilson got so accustomed to balls coming in from the off that he tried standing in front of his wicket, but was always leg before. He tried to pull, but that stroke was foreign to his correct style. He hit out wildly and skied the ball on the off every time. At last he realized the spell that was on him. He was receiver of the off-break. All the damage that Robinson used to do was now done to him. Once he had realized this, he acted promptly, and in a week he had resigned his post. The question was, then, what was to be done? No one would accept the appointment. Wilson's ill luck and the explanation of it had become known throughout the county, and no one else was willing to risk a similar experience. Eventually the judge ordered the off-break to be deposited in court with the title deeds to the other property, and there it remained till the trial. At least it was supposed to remain there. But I heard tales of the wonderful bowling performances of a member of the Civil Service C.C., who had not hitherto been distinguished. I inquired and found he was a clerk in the principal probate registry, and I thought I understood what had happened. No dust would have accumulated on Robinson's disputed bequest. However, that was no affair of mine. What I could not understand was the failure of some Farley Green bowler to accept the vacant receivership. Of course, neither Wilson nor any other batsman should have accepted the office, but a bowler could have made good use of that break. But it was not for me to suggest this. Our return match with Farley Green was coming on, and I did not want Robinson's ghost to spoil our averages. The case came on for trial in November. Farley Green had not had so bad a season for 20 years, and I don't think that even Brown, the legatee, should look forward with much pleasure to the result. But I am bound to admit that the defense the Godalming men set up was shabby. They alleged that the will had been obtained by the undue influence which Brown exercised over poor Robinson. What, in your own words, was the nature of the influence exercised over Mr. Robinson? Asked the plaintiff's counsel. It was twofold, said Harvey. Mr. Brown was umpiring once or twice when Robinson, the testator, was bowling, and I used to think his decisions favored the bowler. In what way? Well, he has given me leg before to a ball that pitched outside the stumps. You were out leg before wicket, then? Yes. And you were not satisfied? I think I was not out. Mr. Harvey, tell me this. Did you ever think you were out in that way? Poor Harvey, being on oath, of course had to admit he never did think so. Now, can you tell me the name of any man who was ever satisfied in such circumstances? Harvey thought he could, but it turned out that he only knew of a man who had admitted he was out after the umpire had decided in his favor, and he made a lot of runs subsequently. His lordship looked at the jury and smiled. Now, tell me, Mr. Harvey, what were the other means by which you say undue influence was exerted? I think it was shown in the desire expressed that the off-break should be used for the Farley Club. Poor Robinson used to belong to a lot of clubs. He often played for us at Godalming, and I never noticed that he himself kept his break for the Farley Club only. But he was a leading member of the Farley Green C.C. Yes. And specially interested in its fortunes? Possibly. After that, of course, there was nothing more to be said. The jury found for the plaintiff without retiring, and the court pronounced in favor of the will. But the season was over, and Farley Green had not had much benefit from the legacy. Next season, of course, we expected them to take their revenge, but for a time things went worse than ever, and Brown, poor Brown, I was really sorry for him. That wretched legacy ruined his average. Brown was a left-handed bowler with a curl from the leg. Robinson had been a right-handed bowler, and the two breaks never amalgamated. Whether the break had been allowed to get damp in court after the season was over, or whatever the cause, it never seemed to work properly in Brown's hands. If he pitched to the off-break was absent, and his own curl from leg made the ball a wide. If he pitched to leg, intending the ball to come in round the batsman's legs, then Robinson's off-break unexpectedly acted, and the batsman got a safe and easy boundary. We used to chaff Brown and advise him to get the break repaired, but the poor fellow was so depressed about it that we soon ceased to talk in this way. And at the end of June he had almost decided to give up bowling. Then a strange thing happened. We were playing the Peace Lake men on our heath when a bronze stranger was noticed peeping from behind the tent. He had tattoo marks on his face and hands, and he had grown a beard. Otherwise he was unchanged, for of course it was Robinson. He had a wonderful tale to tell of shipwrecks and adventures, Malays and missionaries, but that, as has been remarked, is another story. The great thing was, here was Robinson back again, and I was using his favorite bat, and Johnson, for old acquaintance's sake, had put on Robinson's pads and his off-break. That unlucky off-break. Here we were in June, and Robinson was thirsting for a game, and of course, as he was not dead, he wanted his off-break and his other belongings back again. But it took him 7 months to satisfy the court that he was entitled to have them. By that time the off-break had become quite useless. So he has gone in for batting and makes 10 times as many runs as he used to, but his bowling is quite gone. And the most annoying thing is that he had to pay £87 legacy duty to get that off-break back from Brown. End of Robinson's Off-Break by E.B.V. Christian.
The Olympic Games, from Baily's Magazine of Sports and Pastimes, January to June 1906. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports, by Patrick Wallace. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Olympic Games. International encounters, in sport as in most else, are rarely attended with perfect success, and the second great meeting of the revival of the classic games at Athens has furnished no exception to the rule. For such was the number of entries that competitors suffered considerable discomfort in the matter of hotel accommodation. As to the sport itself, whilst the British team cannot be said to have acquitted themselves badly, one must candidly confess that more was expected from them. That America should win the 100 and 400 metres was generally anticipated, as it sent out a peculiarly strong team, which had the advantage of a manager, trainer, and doctor, and had, possibly, the most complete organisation, excepting perhaps that of the Swedes, of any team which has ever left a country to defend that country's honour and pride. The 100 metres race they did win in a good time of 11 seconds, by Hahn, America, with Moulton, America, second, and Barker, Australia, third. But that, even with light body, America's present 1.5 mile champion, magnificent runner as he is, they should win the 800 and 1500 metres was open to the greatest doubt. Even in the regrettable absence of Hawtrey, owing to a swollen ankle, the result of his great 5-mile race, it was thought that Crabbe and Halswell in the former, and Crabbe and McGough in the latter, were capable enough of beating our oversea cousins, who at long-distance events are proverbially weak. Yet none of these were sufficiently good to hold Lightbody and Pilgrim, the former of whom won the 1500 metres in 4 minutes 12 seconds, whilst both of these men put up such a splendid race in the 800 metres that Pilgrim, who had previously beaten Halswell in the 400 metres in 53 seconds, only gained the verdict on the tape by a breast in 2 minutes 1½ seconds. Halswell, who does not seem so good at a half as a quarter, was third, and Crabbe fourth, whilst the latter in the mile could do no better than fifth, McGough taking pride of place for Britain with second. This race was completely thrown away by McGough not showing to the front and making the pace, for the 4 American representatives ran the race as they pleased, and Lightbody proved faster than McGough in the straight. The 5 miles provided us with our only athletic victory, and in this Hawtrey showed what a strong runner he is, as, making the pace all the way, he finished little the worse for the journey in the good time of 26 minutes 11 seconds. Perhaps one should chronicle as an English victory, certainly as a British one, the win of Shering of Canada in the Marathon Road Race. This, the great event of the meeting, was looked on by the Greeks as of the supremest importance, for 10 years ago it was won for them by Louis, their kinsman, and they felt quietly confident of repeating that success. However, Shering, who had been training on the road for 7 weeks, ran superbly, and after 12 miles out had no one near to cause him a moment's doubt, and in consequence he almost walked the last 5 miles. His time showed what a great performance it was, being returned as 2 hours 51 minutes 23 seconds, beating Louis's time of 10 years ago by over 3½ minutes. Being of athletic build, he is an ideal man for the journey, weighing but 9 stone 4 pounds, and he finished remarkably strongly, whereas a heavy man like Daly was in a woebegone condition, footsore, weary, and in a complete state of collapse 8 miles from home, where he retired, being taken with several others to the hospital there, which was soon in a crowded condition, as very few of the competitors got beyond this point. The performance of Svanberg, a Swede who ran second to Hawtrey in the 5-mile race, was excellent, he being but 7 minutes behind the winner, and Frank, the American, who would have stood a better chance but for forcing the pace at the commencement when it was made inexcusably hot, third, 2 minutes later. The 3 first places in the marathon cycle race were gained by Frenchmen, whilst Britain won the tandem by Matthews and Russian, the 12½ miles through Pett, and secured second in the mile and lap against time by the aid of Crowther, and in the 1000 metres with Baufler. These last 2 men found their master in Very of Italy, a rider of immense pluck and resource. Leahy won the high jump with 5 foot 11 inches, and was second to O'Connor in the hop, skip and jump with 13 metres 98. The latter's jump was 14 metres 7½ but he completely failed in the long jump, and had to be content with second place to Prinstein of America. The walking race was rather a fiasco, owing to disqualifications. Wilkinson, our representative, was the first to go, and ended in a win for Bonhag of America, whilst a beautiful walker in Linden of Canada was second. The 110-metre hurdle race fell to Leavitt of America in 16 seconds, with Healy second, though if the first race, which was unfortunately stopped by some official, had been permitted, Healy, whose damaged foot was paining him badly, could probably have won. In swimming, we won the mile through Taylor, with Jarvis second, and in fencing the Englishmen were exceedingly unfortunate, and only robbed of a victory after a draw by the strange award of the jury. Max de Cudlis, for France, won the tennis singles and with his wife the mixed doubles, whilst Goudet also credited his country with first position for a capital pole jump of 11 feet 4 inches. The great success for the Greeks was the putting the stone, won by Georgantas. Sheridan, America, won the discus throwing freestyle with approximately 137 feet, beating his own record, and Järvinen, Finland, the restricted style, 35 metres 70. End of The Olympic Games, from Baily's Magazine of Sports and Pastimes, January to June 1906.
Origin of the Olympic Games by James Edward Sullivan. A fragment of the Olympic Games at Athens, 1906. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports, by Piotr Natter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Origin of the Olympic Games. The origin of the games recedes into the mythical ages. The Greeks reverenced Hercules as their founder, not the hero usually known by that name, but the Idaean Hercules, who was said to have been present at the birth of Zeus himself. The later Hercules, however, also took part in some famous contests here after the defeat of King Augeas in Elis. Enomaus, king of Pisa, the old capital of the district, compelled the suitors of his daughter, Hippodamia, to compete with him in chariot racing, and ignominiously put to death all whom he vanquished, until at length Pelops succeeded in beating him and so won the hand of Hippodamia. Pelops was thus the heroic prototype of the victors of Olympia, and as such was held in high honour there. The actual founding of the games proper is ascribed to Iphitos of Elis, who, along with Lycurgos of Sparta, reorganized the games at the bidding of the Oracle of Delphi in the 9th century BC, introduced the ekeheiria, literally hen-staying, or truce, or peace of the god, among all the states of Greece during the celebration of the games. Pausanias saw the decree inscribed on a discus of bronze, preserved in the Heraion. By this means the Olympian Games rose to the dignity of a national festival, which was the visible expression of Hellenic unity, in spite of all the interracial contentions and wars among the individual states of Greece. The regular chronicle of Olympian victors begins in BC 776, but the use of Olympiads as chronological epochs did not originate till much later. The games took place after the first full moon after the summer solstice. At the beginning of the sacred month, the Eleans, who had been left in undisturbed possession of the sanctuary since about BC 580, sent heralds to proclaim the universal peace throughout all Greece. The competitors and spectators of the festival streamed in from far and near, the larger states represented by embassies, theoriae, which were sometimes of great magnificence. The function lasted for 5 days. The central point was a series of great sacrifices to Zeus and other gods, under the solemn management of priests, some of whom dwelt continuously at Olympia. The sacrifices were accompanied by athletic contests of the most varied description. Foot races, hurling the discus, wrestling, boxing, chariot races, etc., carried on under the direction of the Hellanodike, judges of the Hellenes, who were at the same time the highest political body in Elis. The original and most important event in the games was the foot race in the stadion, at first one length of the course, but afterwards 2 or more. In the 18th Olympiad, BC 708, the pentathlon or 5-fold contest was introduced, a combination of leaping, hurling the discus, running, wrestling and boxing, so arranged that only the victors in the first contest could compete in the latter, and that the final contest should be a boxing match between the 2 best competitors. In the 25th Olympiad, BC 680, was held the first chariot race with 4 horses. In the 33rd Olympiad, BC 648, the first horse race took place, and the pankration, a combination of wrestling and boxing, was introduced. Subsequently, special competitions for boys in most of these sports were arranged, and in the 65th Olympiad, BC 520, the hoplitodromos, or soldiers' race in heavy marching order, was added. The competitions were restricted to free-born Greeks of unstained character, though barbarians might be spectators. Women, with the exception of the Elean priestess of Demeter, were not permitted to view the sports. Before the contest, the competitors had to appear in the Bouleuterion in presence of Zeus Horkios, and take an oath that they had undergone the prescribed 10 months' course of training, and would obey the Olympian laws and regulations of the games. They then entered the stadium by a special entrance with the Helanodike, the heralds announcing the name and country of each athlete as he appeared. The palm was handed to the victor immediately after the contest. The prizes proper, simple branches from the sacred olive tree planted by Hercules himself, were distributed at the end of the games to all the victors at the same time. The Greeks attached the most extraordinary value to the Olympic olive branch. Pindar had celebrated it in a spirited song. Its acquisition was not only a lifelong distinction for the winners, but reflected also the highest honour on their families and on their states, and their countrymen used to testify their gratitude by triumphal receptions, banquets at the public expense, and often by exemption from taxes. In Olympia itself, the champions dwelt at the public expense in the Prytaneion, and had the right of erecting a statue in the Altis, which, in the case of a triple victory, was allowed to bear the features of the victor. Besides these statues, the first of which were erected in wood about the 60th Olympiad, B.C. 540, numerous votive offerings were presented by states and individuals, so that in the course of centuries there arose that forest of statues, the description of which, even after it had been several times plundered by the Romans, fills nearly an entire book in Pausanias. In addition to the athletes, men illustrious in the intellectual sphere also sometimes appeared with their performances. Herodotus is said to have read in public at Olympia a portion of his historical work, and so to have fired the youthful Thucydides, who was present, to the composition of his history. Celebrated authors like Gorgias or Lysias addressed the people from the Opisthodamos of the Temple of Zeus, as did the sophist Hippias of Elis and others. Painters exhibited their works here. It was here also that Themistocles enjoyed his greatest triumph, when at his appearance in the stadium, probably in the 77th Olympiad, B.C. 472, the assembled Greeks greeted the hero of Salamis with shouts of applause. At a later date Plato was also received here with honour by the admiring multitude. The Olympic Games attained their zenith in the period after the Persian Wars, and the contemporary struggles of the Sicilian Greeks against the Carthaginians. As Hellenic influence extended to the east, the contingents from the Asiatic states and from Egypt, as well as those from Macedonia and Thrace, grew larger and larger. In the Roman period we find champions hailing from all parts of the empire, and even two emperors, Tiberius and Nero, on victories here. Greece proper, on the other hand, became less and less conspicuous. Professional athletes appeared, and travelling from one to another of the numerous athletic meetings, succeeded in degrading the Olympic victory to a trade. The regular celebration of the Olympic Games seems to have died out in the 4th century A.D. The Emperor Theodosius finally suppressed them in 394. For translations and extracts, the publishers of Murray's Greece, Baedeker's Greece, and the official Olympic book, edited by C.P. Lambros, are respectfully given credit. End of Origin of the Olympic Games, by James Edward Sullivan.
Patriotism and Sport, by G.K. Chesterton. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Patriotism and Sport. I notice that some papers, especially papers that call themselves patriotic, have fallen into quite a panic over the fact that we have been twice beaten in the world of sport, that a Frenchman has beaten us at golf, and that Belgians have beaten us at rowing. I suppose that the incidents are important to any people who ever believed in the self-satisfied English legend on this subject. I suppose that there are men who vaguely believe that we could never be beaten by a Frenchman, despite the fact that we have often been beaten by Frenchmen, and once by a French woman. In the old pictures in Punch, you will find a recurring piece of satire. The English caricaturists always assumed that a Frenchman could not ride to hounds or enjoy English hunting. It did not seem to occur to them that all the people who founded English hunting were Frenchmen. All the kings and nobles who originally rode to hounds spoke French. Large numbers of those Englishmen who still ride to hounds have French names. I suppose that the thing is important to anyone who is ignorant of such evident matters as these. I suppose that if a man has ever believed that we English have some sacred and separate right to be athletic, such reverses do appear quite enormous and shocking. They feel as if, while the proper sun was rising in the east, some other and unexpected sun had begun to rise in the north-northwest by north. For the benefit, the moral and intellectual benefit of such people, it may be worth while to point out that the Anglo-Saxon has in these cases been defeated precisely by those competitors whom he has always regarded as being out of the running. By Latins, and by Latins of the most easy and unstrenuous type, not only by Frenchmen, but by Belgians. All this, I say, is worth telling to any intelligent person who believes in the haughty theory of Anglo-Saxon superiority. But then, no intelligent person does believe in the haughty theory of Anglo-Saxon superiority. No quite genuine Englishman ever did believe in it, and the genuine Englishman these defeats will in no respect dismay. The genuine English patriot will know that the strength of England has never depended upon any of these things, that the glory of England has never had anything to do with them, except in the opinion of a large section of the rich and a loose section of the poor, which copies the idleness of the rich. These people will, of course, think too much of our failure, just as they thought too much of our success. The typical jingoes who have admired their countrymen too much for being conquerors will, doubtless, despise their countrymen too much for being conquered. But the Englishman with any feeling for England will know that the athletic failures do not prove that England is weak, any more than athletic successes proved that England was strong. The truth is that athletics, like all other things, especially modern, are insanely individualistic. The Englishmen who win sporting prizes are exceptional among Englishmen for the simple reason that they are exceptional even among men. English athletes represent England just about as much as Mr. Barnum's freaks represent America. There are so few of such people in the whole world that it is almost a toss-up whether they are found in this or that country. If anyone wants a simple proof of this, it is easy to find. When the great English athletes are not exceptional Englishmen, they are generally not Englishmen at all. Nay, they are often representatives of races of which the average tone is specially incompatible with athletics. For instance, the English are supposed to rule the natives of India in virtue of their superior hardiness, superior activity, superior health of body and mind. The Hindus are supposed to be our subjects because they are less fond of action, less fond of openness and the open air. In a word, less fond of cricket. And substantially this is probably true, that the Indians are less fond of cricket. All the same, if you ask among Englishmen for the very best cricket player, you will find that he is an Indian. Or to take another case, it is, broadly speaking, true that the Jews are, as a race, pacific, intellectual, indifferent to war, like the Indians, or perhaps contemptuous of war, like the Chinese. Nevertheless, of the very good prize fighters, one or two have been Jews. This is one of the strongest instances of the particular kind of evil that arises from our English form of the worship of athletics. It concentrates too much upon the success of individuals. It began quite naturally and rightly with wanting England to win. The second stage was that it wanted some Englishmen to win. The third stage was, in the ecstasy and agony of some special competition, that it wanted one particular Englishman to win. And the fourth stage was that when he had won, it discovered that he was not even an Englishman. This is one of the points, I think, on which something might really be said for Lord Roberts and his rather vague ideas which vary between rifle clubs and conscription. Whatever may be the advantages or disadvantages otherwise of the idea, it is at least an idea of procuring equality and a sort of average in the athletic capacity of the people. It might conceivably act as a corrective to our mere tendency to see ourselves in certain exceptional athletes. As it is, there are millions of Englishmen who really think that they are a muscular race because C.B. Fry is an Englishman, and there are many of them who think vaguely that athletics must belong to England because Ranjit Singh is an Indian. But the real historic strength of England, physical and moral, has never had anything to do with this athletic specialism. It has been rather hindered by it. Somebody said that the Battle of Waterloo was won on Eton's playing fields. It was a particularly unfortunate remark, for the English contribution to the victory of Waterloo depended very much more than is common in victories upon the steadiness of the rank and file in an almost desperate situation. The Battle of Waterloo was won by the stubbornness of the common soldier. That is to say, it was won by the man who had never been to Eton. It was absurd to say that Waterloo was won on Eton cricket fields, but it might have been fairly said that Waterloo was won on the village green, where clumsy boys played a very clumsy cricket. In a word, it was the average of the nation that was strong, and athletic glories do not indicate much about the average of a nation. Waterloo was not won by good cricket players, but Waterloo was won by bad cricket players, by a mass of men who had some minimum of athletic instincts and habits. It is a good sign in a nation when such things are done badly. It shows that all the people are doing them. And it is a bad sign in a nation when such things are done very well, for it shows that only a few experts and eccentrics are doing them, and that the nation is merely looking on. Suppose that whenever we heard of walking in England, it always meant walking 45 miles a day without fatigue. We should be perfectly certain that only a few men were walking at all, and that all the other British subjects were being wheeled about in bath chairs. But if when we hear of walking it means slow walking, painful walking, and frequent fatigue, then we know that the mass of the nation still is walking. We know that England is still literally on its feet. The difficulty is therefore that the actual raising of the standard of athletics has probably been bad for national athleticism. Instead of the tournament being a healthy mêlée, into which any ordinary man would rush and take his chance, it has become a fenced and guarded tilting yard for the collision of particular champions, against whom no ordinary man would pit himself, or even be permitted to pit himself. If Waterloo was won on Eton cricket fields, it was because Eton cricket was probably much more careless then than it is now. As long as the game was a game, everybody wanted to join in it. When it becomes an art, everyone wants to look at it. When it was frivolous, it may have won Waterloo. When it was serious and efficient, it lost Magersfontein. In the Waterloo period, there was a general rough-and-tumble athleticism among average Englishmen. It cannot be recreated by cricket, or by conscription, or by any artificial means. It was a thing of the soul. It came out of laughter, religion, and the spirit of the place, but it was like the modern French duel in this, that it might happen to anybody. If I were a French journalist, it might really happen that Monsieur Clemenceau might challenge me to meet him with pistols, but I do not think that it is at all likely that Mr. C.B. Fry will ever challenge me to meet him with cricket bats. End of Patriotism and Sport by G.K. Chesterton.
The Raven of a Golf Maniac by Martha Michelle Martin, read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports, by Anita Sloma Martinez. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Raven of a Golf Maniac. Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December that I pondered weak and weary o'er my volumes of golf lore, Eagerly I wished the morrow that I happiness might borrow from a game that would cause sorrow, sorrow to opponents sore, to opponents, male and female, who would evermore be sore at the lowness of my score. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping, saying to me, "4." "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, "out there jealous of my score. Only this and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing that a rival had come wandering to my door. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only words there spoken were the whispered words, "Your score." Merely this, and nothing more. Open then I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a saucy caddy who knew well my score. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with cool assurance laid he my golf clubs upon the floor. Then he kicked them, nothing more. "Prophet," cried I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if boy or devil, by Chick Evans, Varden, Travers, and the others we adore. Tell this would-be champion truly, when will bogey be his score?" Quoth the caddy, "Nevermore." "Be that word our sign of parting, boy or friend," I shrieked, upstarting, "get thee back onto the golf links, use your voice to call out 4. Do not try to cool my ardor, for I'll only practice harder, and I know that Colonel Bogey I'll be downing with my score." Quoth the caddy, "Nevermore." And the spirit of that caddy, never flitting, must be sitting still upon my harmless golf clubs that he kicked upon the floor. For my shots have all the seeming as if played by one who's dreaming, and with driver, cleek, and mashie I'm the one to call out 4. Always am I in the background, always do I call out 4. Good score make I? Nevermore. End of The Raven of a Golf Maniac by Martha Michelle Martin.
Story of Kahanamoku by Anonymous. From the New York Times, September 23, 1917. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports, by Colleen McMahon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Story of Kahanamoku. Hawaiian swimmer has devoted his life to water sports. Duke Kahanamoku, the Hawaiian swimmer, who again broke records at a sanctioned national swimming meet in Honolulu on September 3rd, 5th, and 6th, has lived practically all of his life in the waters of the Pacific Ocean. He was born close to the shores of the beach at Waikiki, Honolulu, and as a baby paddled in the waters of the coral sand beach, and at the age of 4 was swimming with ease, and often in the presence of royalty, for his father was a Hawaiian high chief of ancient regime and lived in the royal palace enclosure. It was this fact, it is said, that gave him his Christian name Duke. During the reign of Kamehameha V in 1869, the Duke of Edinburgh arrived in Honolulu and was the guest of the king, residing at the royal palace. There are half a dozen important events in Hawaii's history which are still referred to by old-time Hawaiians as unusual incidents, and one of these was the English peer's visit. During his sojourn in the Hawaiian capital, a son was born to a high chief, whose family name was Kahanamoku. The son was named Duke in honor of the visiting peer, who was sponsor at the christening. The son of the first Duke Kahanamoku is the present Duke. Throughout his life, Duke Kahanamoku has never indulged in smoking or drinking, and in spite of the lionizing which has been his due since his victory at the Stockholm Olympic Games a few years ago, he has always kept in training. Following his victory at Stockholm, the citizens of Honolulu presented Duke with a lot near Waikiki Beach and a bungalow home, which he shares with his brothers, sister, and mother. His brothers are almost as prominent in local swimming as himself, and one of them is now a lifeguard at Waikiki Beach, employed by the Outrigger Club. In business circles, Duke Kahanamoku is a member of the staff of Public Works Department of the Territory of Hawaii. As an inspector of wharf building, his daily practice calls him to the waterfront, where in addition to inspection, he has become an expert diver and often dons regulation diving costume, helmet, rubber suit, and all, and descends to the bottom of the harbor to inspect piers and other features in connection with wharf building. It was while on duty as an inspector a year ago that there was need of the services of a diver and none at that moment procurable. Kahanamoku immediately volunteered to don the diving costume, although he had never had one on before. He made a successful descent to the harbor bottom. In his September performances, when he raced against Norman Ross, whom he defeated in the 50-yard race, his time was 23.35 seconds in the final and 23 seconds in the first heat. In the 100-yard race, in which he directly competed with Norman Ross and John Cowley, another Hawaiian, his time was 53 seconds, breaking his own world record of 53.15 seconds. End of Story of Kahanamoku by Anonymous.
Trout and Other Fly Fishing by Francis E. Slaughter. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Trout and Other Fly Fishing. This subject, far from being treated exhaustively, or even with any attempt at fullness, will, on the contrary, only be written of so as to give a few hints to those who love to wield the rod. Bottom fishing, with the paraphernalia necessary to that branch of the sport, has objections at least from a woman's point of view, but to fly fishing with the fly there is no drawback, unless indeed you happen to be one of those who hold that you should never pit your skill against one of the lower animals in a struggle for life. Of all sports, indeed, there is none more entirely suited to the powers of woman than fly fishing. The nicety, the quickness, the light-handedness, and care as to details, and I think I may add thoroughness, in any pursuit they really take to, in which women generally excel, are all points in her favour the moment she takes a rod in hand. Great strength is not needed, unless indeed she choose to go after one of the leviathans of the deep, but only constant and exhaustless patience. Yet it is the mention of the last that will make many who know only of the sport by hearsay look scornful and say they see no fun in standing watching and waiting for the bite that often never comes, and that they prefer something more active. As it is no use arguing with people who are persuaded they view the subject from a vastly superior standpoint, the only answer to this is, if you do not change your opinion after a week's or even a day's experience, well, fly fishing is not for you. What I am anxious to impress upon all is that fly fishing is not necessarily an expensive sport. For the best of salmon fishing and the right to try for trout in their choicest waters, you must indeed pay, but for the right to fish for their less thought of brethren, there need be but small demands on your purse. My own experience one summer may be of some use to those who would fain do likewise. My lot was cast in a part of Sussex where under the downs flowed a tiny but most beautiful little river. No trout had been the answer given when I inquired as to the prospect of sport from its banks. So sadly I made up my mind that beyond an occasional visit to a trout stream, owned by some friends in the same county, my rod would be idle that summer. If only it was stocked with trout, was my frequent reflection as I wandered along its banks and noted the swift-flowing current and the tempting stickles that looked a perfect paradise from a trouting point of view. One evening, as I stood watching the clear waters as they rushed round and over some opposing rocks into a large pool, I caught sight of a silvery, most graceful fish dart through the water at the side of the eddy. Then when my eye became accustomed to the curious light, as the rays of the setting sun fell slantways over the pool, through the branches of a mighty oak tree that rose from the banks, I saw another and another. Dace, was my verdict, and forthwith dismissed them from my mind. but I had not reached home before the thought of trying for those dace with fly came to me, and the next day, trout rod in hand, and with a black palmer and alder on the cast, I made my first venture in what was to me quite a new branch of the sport. As the line flew out for the second time, and the flies fell gently and lightly on the water, I had but to wait a second before a faint thrill ran through my hand, and told me something had touched the fly. Could it be a bite? So different was it to the sudden onslaught of a trout that I hesitated whether or not to strike. And, contrary to the usual fate of the waverer, it was the momentary pause which gave me the fish. A slight movement of the wrist, and I had him fast, and then a delicious few minutes followed while I played as game a dace as I ever wished to measure skill with. Indeed, I should not have been surprised when at last my prize was safely caught in the landing net, to see the spotted scales of a trout. But no, the slender, silvery, beautiful-headed fish could be no other than a dace, and his captor at least was content with the gallant bid he had made for his life. If dace would take the fly, why not also roach and chub, and soon, faute de mieux, it is true, but none the less with very considerable enjoyment, I was fishing the little stream for all three kinds in turn. On the gravelly bottom of a certain portion of the water, I found a red palmer very attractive to the roach, which were there in considerable numbers. Some of them were fair size, the largest I took turning the scales at 1 pound, but I am bound to confess that I found these fish such very shy biters that I generally preferred to try either for dace or chub. One roach, however, gave rather a novel experience by hanging itself in a tree and causing the greatest excitement among our party, the members of which quickly came from their chosen spots to see and admire. I was fishing from the shelter of a bush on the top of a high steep bank, and with some trees close at the rear, and a decidedly fresh breeze blowing. It was not an easy matter to get the line safely out at all. The water, however, was but little disturbed by the wind, from which just there it was protected by the high ground, and the fish were clearly visible in the water below. As there was nothing for it in such a position but to swing the fish out if I caught one, I did not for that once wish to make a big capture. Scarcely had the tail fly, this was a red palmer, touched the water than one of the usual shy bites was made, and fortunately my strike secured the prize so far. But he seemed heavy, and was besides the gamest of his kind I have ever played. Quietly we could not manage things, and it was very soon clear that if I did not then secure him, I need not struggle with the difficulties of casting again in that part of the stream, for every other finny inhabitant would have taken the alarm. All my faculties were therefore intent on the capture. When I saw him at last tired of struggling and almost beneath me, I tried to swing him up, wondering, as I did so, if it were possible my light tackle could stand the strain. A flash of silver through the air, then a puff of wind, and a red-finned, black-backed roach of about 8 ounces in weight was dangling over the topmost bough of a tree which grew up from the lower part of the bank a little to my left. The poor fish struggled, and the line swayed ominously among the branches, till at last a nimble climber released them both, and, to my delight, restored them to me. For chub I found a larger fly effective, and a coachman and a red palmer, both tied large, were what I generally used. In my experience, chub is the most determined biter of any of those I am now discussing, and he is very game up to a certain point, his dashes and struggles as he tries to free himself from the hook being as fierce as those of many a good trout. The battle, however, will be over much sooner than with one of the latter species, and when you see the inert form in the water, you will realize with sorrow that after all he does not belong to the kind known as game fish. In fishing for chub, you must be as careful about showing yourself as you would be in trying for a trout, for he is very quick in spotting anything unusual, and once he has done this, you may offer him the most tempting flies unavailingly. By the time you have landed a 2-pound chub, you will, in my opinion, have exercised to the full as much, if not more, skill than you would have done in the capture of a trout, and though the sport of playing him will be sooner over, it will have been good indeed while it lasted. The chub I found to rise earlier in the day in this little Sussex stream than either dace or roach, the two last on the warm August evenings, often rising freely as long as we could see to cast for them. The great difference between fishing with the fly for game and coarse fish lies in this, that while with the latter you require even more lightness of hand and skill in casting than on any ordinary trout stream, the intense excitement of the moments when you play a good trout or salmon will not be experienced to the same extent, but that sport, and good sport, may be enjoyed with any of the three varieties I have named, I have proved to my own satisfaction, and I hope that what I have said may induce others to try for themselves. At the same time that nothing can equal the joy of playing and landing your first trout, I would be the last to deny, for the day on which the first fell to my rod is still marked as a red-letter day in my life. This also was in Sussex, in a well-stocked, merry little stream which babbled and chattered over its white stones, giving the last touch of beauty to the peaceful valley through which it flowed. After the preliminary walk along the banks of that part of the water I was to fish, so as to get the knowledge of the position of the pools and eddies and overhanging banks, without which one's labour is likely to be thrown away, I sallied forth, rod in hand, to the neighbourhood of a bridge from which I had noted several trout lying with their heads upstream. A few hundred yards from this, where the bank, it is true, did not seem to offer much facility for casting, there was an eddy at one side of the stream and a mass of rushes on the other, all under the shadow of trees which rose between them and the bridge. When it is remembered that I was trying for my first trout, the experience now lies back in the dim distance of the past. It will not perhaps cause surprise if I say that my whole being thrilled with the excitement of the moment. My cast had a red palmer for the tail fly, and black alder as dropper, for at dinner the night before I had been advised to try these by a local fisherman. I should probably make a mess of it, and catch my line in either one or other of the traps that literally bristled on all sides of me, was the thought that was uppermost, as after scrambling down cautiously and keeping well out of view, I craned my neck to see how I could possibly get my cast to light on the spot I had chosen. As I had my hand up for the venture, a swift rise just where my eyes were fixed on the water told me of the presence of a trout. My line flew out, and the tail fly, falling within the widening circle, was instantly seized, and a sharp turn of the wrist gave me a trout with a bewildering suddenness. Up went the point of the rod, and the good cane bent to the weight beneath. A maddened dash across the stream to the reeds was the first attempt of the prey, then a trial to get to the shelter of a rock conveniently near, but slowly and surely he gave in to the steady pull brought to bear on him, and soon I looked with unspeakable delight on a half-pound trout in the prime of condition, safe within the folds of the landing net. That no fish ever comes up to the one you first capture has since this moment been an article of faith with me. Others larger, gamer, better in every sense may and will, if you have ordinary skill and perseverance, fall to your rod, but nothing will give you the same thrill of rapture you felt when you saw your first trout on the bank at your feet. To make a good trout fisher there are, of course, many things to learn, and one of the greatest charms of the sport lies in this, of what there is to know of it. But pre-eminently is it true that an ounce of practice is worth a ton of precepts. You must, to a very great extent, by your own experience, and though you will always do well to profit by other people's advice, you must yourself build up the theories which will show you how, when, and where to cast, so that fish may rise to your fly, when they are proof against the blandishments of the less skilfully thrown lure. That you should always study the lie of the water over which you mean to fish is a truism, and yet it is a fundamental rule to the neglect of which many, both men and women, owe the fact that they never rise above a very mediocre degree of skill. Unless you know something of the habits of the fish and the spots in which he is likely to be found, how can you hope to succeed in making him acquainted with your fly? To prevent him catching a glimpse of you, and for this end to be dressed so as scarcely to be distinguished from the ground upon which you will be standing, to make no noise or disturbance, to throw with the utmost delicacy of hand, to strike instantaneously, or the reverse according to the particular class of fish you are angling for, to cast upstream or partly up and across, and never to allow the gut to make a ripple as you draw your cast through the water. All these constitute the ABC of an angler's stock of learning. I believe that most people carry about with them a quite unnecessary stock of flies, and that as much success will fall to you if you only provide yourself with different kinds of palmers, black and red gnats, the black alder, red spinner, March brown, blue upright, yellow dung, stonefly, Wickham's fancy, Greenwell's glory, and on some streams, the green drake, having these in several shades and tied on different sized hooks, never forgetting to supplement them by any others recommended by local fishermen whose knowledge, remember, has probably been bought by careful study and long and varied experience. For coarse fish I have found the palmers, black gnat, artificial grub, and bumblebee the most successful, the chub always liking their fly tied large, the dace and roach preferring theirs small. A rod well chosen and well balanced is, of course, of the first necessity to your success. To speak again from my own experience, I found an inexpensive light greenheart made by Hancock, a delightful rod in every respect, and with this my first ventures both with trout and coarse fish were made. It only measured 10 foot 6 inches, but was beautifully balanced, and you could make very fairly long casts with it. As a beginner you should always get some experienced friend to choose your rod for you, though like everything else of the kind you will naturally prefer to make the choice yourself as soon as you know how to test the balance, on which all else depends. In the matter of outfit, you will need a creel, which should contain an upper tray for luncheon, a landing net, and 1 or 2 casts ready-made for use. The last may be fastened round your hat, and of course, if you have any idea of being independent and going out by yourself, your creel and net should be chosen with a view to lightness, or they will naturally add materially to the fatigue of a day on the river-bank. Lastly, I would say that if you should have the opportunity of going out with a good fisherman on a river or lake, there to learn the elements of fly-fishing, by all means avail yourself of it. In no other way can you master the rudimentary practice so easily as from a boat, for there will be no bushes or banks, or the 101 difficulties you may have to consider on land, and you will therefore be able to concentrate your efforts on getting your line out in a fairly workmanlike manner. That you should not be easily discouraged it is scarcely necessary to add, for who that has landed her first trout has not straightway felt the fever of the rod take possession of her. End of Trout and Other Fly Fishing by Francis E. Slaughter.
Verses and Games by Rudyard Kipling. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Verses on Games. Here is a horse to tame, here is a gun to handle. God knows you can enter the game if you'll only pay for the same, and the price of the game is a candle, a single flickering candle. January, hunting. Certes it is a noble sport, and men have quitted cell and swam fort. But I am of the meeker sort, and I prefer certes in comfort. Reach me my Handley Cross again. My run, where never danger lurks, is with Jorrocks and his deathless train, Pig, Benjamin, and Artaxerxes. February, coursing. Most men harry the world for fun. Each man seeks it a different way. But of all daft devils under the sun, a greyhound's the daftest, says Jorrocks J. March, racing. The horse is ridden, the jockey rides, the backer's back, the owner's own, but there are lots of things beside, and I should let this game alone. April, rowing. The Pope of Rome he could not win from pleasant meats and pleasant scene, these who, replying not, submit unto the curses of the pit, which that stern coach, oh greater shame, flings forth by number not by name. Can triple crown or Jesuit's oath do what one wrathful trainer doth? May, fishing. Behold a parable. A fished for B, C took her bait, her heart being set on D. Thank heaven who cools your blood and cramped your wishes. Men and not gods torment you, little fishes. June, cricket. Thank God who made the British Isles, and taught me how to play. I do not worship crocodiles, or bow the knee to clay. Give me a willow wand, and I, with hide and cork and twine, from century to century, will gambol round my shrine. July, archery. The child of the 90s considers with laughter the maid whom his sire in the 60s ran after, while careering himself in pursuit of a girl whom the 20s will dub a last century heirloom. August, coaching. The pious horse to church may trot, a maid may work a man's salvation. 4 horses and a girl are not, however, roads to reformation. September, shooting. Peace upon earth, goodwill to men, so greet we Christmas Day. O Christian, load your gun, and then, O Christian, out and slay. October, golf. Why golf is art and art is golf, we have not far to seek. So much depends upon the lie, so much upon the clique. November, boxing. Read here the moral roundly read, for him who into battle goes, each soul that hitting hard or hit, endureth gross or ghastly foes. Prince blown by many overthrows, half blind with shame, half choked with dirt. Man cannot tell, but Allah knows how much the other side was hurt. December, skating. Over the ice she flies, perfect and poised and fair. Stars in my true love's eyes, teach me to do and dare. Now will I fly as she flies. Woe for the stars that misled, stars I beheld in her eyes, now do I see in my head. Now we must come away. What are you, out of pocket? Sorry to spoil your play, but somebody says we must pay, and the candle's down to the socket, its horrible tallowy socket. End of Verses on Games by Rudyard Kipling.
The Wooing by Anonymous, read for the Coffee Break Collection 27 Sports by Anita Sloma Martinez. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wooing. The sporting instinct is now so keen among girls that a man who gallantly moderates his hitting in mixed hockey is merely regarded as an incapable slacker by his fair opponents. When first I played hockey with Kitty, I was right off my usual game, for she looked so bewitchingly pretty when straight for the circle she came. As a rule, I'm not backward or chary of hitting and harassing too, but who can be rough with a fairy? Not I, so I let her go through. She scored, and we couldn't get equal. The others all thought me a fool, and Kitty herself in the sequel grew most unexpectedly cool. They gave us a licking as stated. I was sick at the sight of the ball. She thought me a lot overrated, and wondered they played me at all. But she frankly approved Percy Waters, who uses his stick like a flail, and always impartially slaughters both sexes, the strong and the frail. A mutual friendliness followed. I watched its career with dismay. Next match day my feelings I swallowed, and hit in my orthodox way. I caught her a crunch on the knuckle, a clip on the knee and the cheek. She said with a rapturous chuckle, I see you weren't trying last week. Such conduct its cruelty loses when it brings consolation to both, for after she'd counted her bruises, that evening we plighted our troth. End of the Wooing by Anonymous.
Wrestling and Football in 1681 by Walter Besant, from London in the Time of the Stuarts. Read for the Coffee Break Collection 27, Sports. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Wrestling and Football in 1681. In 1681, the king witnessed a wrestling match where the abettors were the monarch and the Duke of Albemarle. A meadow below the castle was the scene of action, and the match was composed of 12 men on each side. The king's party wore red waistcoats and the duke's blue. A ring or enclosure was formed, and a space in it admitted the royal coach. The queen and her ladies viewed the contest from the terrace, but the duke mixed with the crowd. The activity displayed on this occasion excited great applause, and only one of the number offered foul play, which the duke punished by tripping up his heels. The victory was gained by the Blues, and they thus procured their employer 200 guineas, the wager depending. The sum of 10 shillings each was given to the king's men, and 20 shillings to the victors. After which the king's men challenged the dukes at back-sword, in which exercise some being unskilful, others were taken in to complete the number. This was performed with great skill and courage, but not attended with those barbarous circumstances which were usual with the Roman gladiators, who, to show the emperor sport, sheathed their swords in one another's bowels. Our most clement and gracious king, abominating all acts of cruelty. The issue of this was only some broken pates, and the palm was again given to the Blues. The king's men, being heated, and unwilling that the dukes should thus carry a victory, resolved to have another trial with them, and challenged them at football, which being accepted, the goals staked out, and the ball placed in the middle, the duke held up an handkerchief over the ball, the letting fall of which was the signal to give the start, and the handkerchief a reward to him that got the first kick, which was one of the duke's men, who in all 3 exercises behaved himself so singularly active that his majesty took particular notice of him, and gave him a guinea. And notwithstanding fortune still appeared on the duke's side, his majesty seemed highly pleased with that day's divertisement. End of Wrestling and Football in 1681 by Walter Besant, from London in the Time of the Stuarts.